A single muddy paw print on a $5,000 suit. That's all it took for CEO Alexandra Hale to unleash her fury on a maintenance worker and his dog, calling the animal filthy, demanding it be removed from her pristine tower. She had no idea that the worthless mutt she mocked would soon be the only thing standing between her and a terrifying death. This is the story of how prejudice, pride, and a hero in fur changed everything. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday morning, turning the streets of Manhattan into rivers of reflected neon and brake lights. It was the kind of rain that made taxi drivers curse and pedestrians sprint for cover, their newspapers held uselessly overhead. But for Alexandra Hale, CEO of Hale Industries, the weather was nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed, like everything else in her meticulously controlled world. Her limousine glided to a stop in front of the marble plaza that stretched before her corporate tower like a gleaming altar to success. 43 stories of steel and glass reached toward the storm-darkened sky, each window a testament to the empire she'd built from her father's demanding legacy. The building wasn't just her workplace. It was her fortress, her kingdom, her proof that she'd exceeded every impossible expectation set before her. "Ms. Hale, the umbrella," her driver offered, already opening his door. "I'll manage, Thomas." Her voice carried that particular edge, not quite rude but brooking no argument. She'd perfected that tone over 15 years of clawing her way through boardrooms full of men who'd thought her father's name was the only reason she'd succeeded. She stepped from the car, her Louboutins clicking against the wet marble with the precision of a metronome. Her charcoal suit was impeccable, tailored to perfection, not a thread out of place. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that was somehow both severe and elegant. Everything about Alexandra Hale communicated one message: untouchable. The plaza stretched before her, usually pristine, but today scattered with puddles and fallen leaves. Her eyes scanned the space with the critical assessment of a general surveying a battlefield. Everything had to be perfect. The investors arriving at 2 o'clock would judge every detail, and she would not give them a single reason to doubt. That's when she saw it. Near the revolving doors, a man in the navy blue uniform of building maintenance stood with a mop and bucket. Beside him sat a dog, some kind of shepherd mix, brown and tan, with intelligent eyes and a tail that thumped against the wet marble. And that dog was soaking wet, water dripping from its coat onto the immaculate floor she'd personally selected 3 years ago. Alexandra's jaw tightened, her pace quickened, but before she could reach the entrance, the dog stood, shook itself with the enthusiastic vigor that only a wet dog could manage, and sent a spray of muddy water directly across the plaza, directly onto her suit. Time seemed to slow. Alexandra looked down at the dark spots spreading across her charcoal jacket, at the droplets sliding down the silk of her blouse. Her hands, which had been holding her briefcase, now hung frozen at her sides as her brain processed what had just happened. When she looked up, her eyes were ice. "You." The word came out like a blade. The maintenance man turned and Alexandra got her first real look at him. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that spoke of physical labor rather than gym memberships. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and his face carried the kind of weathered quality that came from years of outdoor work. There was something about his eyes, a depth, a wariness, that might have given her pause on another day. But not today. Not with muddy water soaking into fabric that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Ma'am?" His voice was quiet, respectful, but not servile. That annoyed her even more. "What?" Alexandra said, each word deliberate and sharp. "Is that animal doing in my building?" The man's expression didn't change, but she saw his hand drop to rest on the dog's head. The gesture was protective. I don't care what you were just doing." Alexandra stepped closer, and she saw him straighten slightly, as if bracing for impact. "Do you see this?" She gestured to her ruined suit. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I apologize. Ranger?" Alexandra's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You've named it? That's charming. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to remove that filthy animal from this property immediately. You're going to clean every single water spot from this plaza until it shines. And then you're going to explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to bring a muddy dog into a corporate environment on the most important day of the quarter. A small crowd had begun to gather near the doors. Alexandra was peripherally aware of her employees watching, but she didn't care. Let them see. Let them remember that standards existed for a reason. Ms. Hale, the man's voice remained steady, which only fueled her anger. Why wasn't he apologizing properly? Why wasn't he scrambling to fix this? I don't believe I gave you permission to speak. Well, Alexandra's voice could have cut diamond. What's your name? Ethan Ward, ma'am. Well, Mr. Ward, let me make something very clear. This is Hale Industries. We have standards, we have protocols, and we certainly don't have filthy animals tracking mud and God knows what else across floors that are supposed to impress some of the most important investors in the country. She paused, letting her words sink in. Do you understand me? Ethan Ward looked at her for a long moment. His jaw worked slightly, and she could see him choosing his words carefully. I understand. Good. Then remove it, now. Yes, ma'am. He reached down for the dog's leash, but before he could move, a small voice cut through the rain. Daddy? Alexandra turned to see a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, emerging from the revolving doors. She wore a yellow raincoat with ducks on it, and her brown hair was pulled into 2 slightly lopsided pigtails. Her eyes, the same shade as Ethan Ward's, were wide with concern. Daddy, is everything okay? Mr. Jenkins said I should wait inside, but I heard... The girl stopped when she saw Alexandra, and her words trailed off into uncertainty. Everything's fine, Sophie. Ethan's voice softened in a way that made Alexandra's chest tighten with an emotion she refused to name. Go back inside with Mr. Jenkins. I'll be right there. But Sophie had noticed the dog, now pressing against Ethan's leg with what almost looked like concern. Is Ranger in trouble? He didn't mean to... Sophie. Ethan's tone was gentle but firm. Inside, please. The little girl looked between her father and Alexandra, her small face troubled. Then she reached down and patted the dog's head. It's okay, Ranger. Daddy will fix it. She turned and walked back through the doors, her yellow raincoat a splash of brightness against the gray morning. Alexandra watched her go, feeling something uncomfortable twist in her stomach. Your daughter? The question came out more accusatory than she'd intended. Yes. Ethan's hand remained on the dog's head, and Alexandra could see his fingers moving slightly in the animal's fur. A soothing gesture, though she couldn't tell if it was meant to comfort the dog or himself. And you thought it appropriate to bring your child and your pet to work? Alexandra's brief moment of discomfort evaporated into fresh irritation. This is a corporate office building, Mr. Ward, not a daycare center. Sophie had a half day at school. Normally she goes to my neighbor's, but Mrs. Chen had a doctor's appointment. I got permission from building management to have her here for a few hours. His voice remained even, factual. And Ranger is here because there was a gas leak report in the sub-level parking. He's trained to detect... I don't care what he's trained to detect. Alexandra cut him off. What I care about is that I have investors arriving in... She checked her watch. 6 hours, and I need this building to be absolutely perfect. And perfect doesn't include wet dogs, maintenance workers' children, or employees who can't follow basic professional protocols. She saw something flicker across Ethan's face. Not anger exactly, something closer to disappointment, which somehow stung worse. Understood, Ms. Hale. He tugged gently on the leash. Come on, Ranger. The dog stood, gave one last shake that made Alexandra step back instinctively, and followed Ethan toward the service entrance at the side of the building. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, several employees suddenly very interested in their phones. Alexandra stood alone in the rain for a moment, looking down at her ruined suit. The spots were already setting into the fabric. The suit was finished. $2,000, gone because some maintenance worker couldn't control his animal. She spun on her heel and stalked toward the entrance, her anger a familiar, comfortable shield against the cold morning and the strange discomfort still nagging at the edges of her mind. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor passed in silence. Alexandra shared the car with 3 junior associates who pressed themselves against the walls as if afraid she might notice them. Smart. Her assistant, Marcus, was waiting when the doors opened, tablet in hand and expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Hale, good morning. I've rescheduled your 9 o'clock with—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes dropping to her jacket. "Oh, don't." Alexandra brushed past him toward her corner office. "Just get me Jenkins, now." "Yes, ma'am." Her office was exactly as she'd left it the night before. Immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that had cost extra in the building's design phase. Her desk was clear except for a single laptop and a fountain pen that had belonged to her grandfather. Awards and accolades lined one wall, Forbes 30. Under 30, Business Week's most innovative CEOs, a framed letter from the mayor thanking her for her contributions to the city's economic development. Alexandra shrugged out of her ruined jacket and hung it on the back of her chair, then moved to the window. From up here, the people below were tiny, insignificant. The rain streaked the glass, distorting the city into abstract patterns of light and shadow. She'd worked for this view, bled for it, sacrificed relationships, sleep, any semblance of a normal life, all for this office, this position, this proof that she was worthy. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, as it so often did. "Excellence isn't a goal, Alexandra. It's a baseline. Anything less is failure." She was 8 years old in the memory, standing in her father's study with a report card that boasted straight A's, but he'd only pointed to the single A- in mathematics. "Explain this." She'd learned young that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned and earned again, that there was no room for softness or sentiment in the Hale family. Her mother had tried to soften her father's edges, to teach Alexandra that worth wasn't measured in achievements alone, but cancer had stolen her when Alexandra was 12. After that, it was just her and her father and his impossible standards. She'd exceeded them all, built his company into something he'd never imagined. And still, in every board meeting, every decision, every moment of triumph, she heard his voice asking if she couldn't have done better. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Marcus entered with Carl Jenkins, head of building operations. Jenkins was in his 60s, with the permanently tired look of someone who'd spent decades managing the unglamorous details that kept a building running. He held his cap in his hands, already nervous. "Ms. Hale, Marcus said you wanted to see me?" "I want to know," Alexandra said, her voice dangerously calm, "why there was a dog in my building this morning. A wet, muddy dog that ruined my suit and created an absolutely unprofessional spectacle mere hours before the most important investor presentation of the year." Jenkins shifted his weight. "That would be Ranger, ma'am. Ethan Ward's dog. I know whose dog it is, Mr. Jenkins. What I want to know is why it was here. We had a gas leak report from the parking sublevel last night. Standard protocol is to check it out before business hours. Ethan asked if he could bring Ranger because the dog's trained to detect—" "So I've heard." Alexandra crossed her arms. "And you gave permission for this?" "Well, yes. Ranger's actually pretty remarkable. He's detected 3 potential hazards in the past year that our equipment missed. Back when Ethan was with the FDNY, he trained— I don't care about his credentials, Mr. Jenkins. I care about results. And the result this morning was a muddy dog, a maintenance worker's child wandering around, and me standing in the rain covered in filth." She let the silence stretch. "This cannot happen again. Am I clear?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure—" "You'll make sure that Mr. Ward understands the standards we expect. You'll make sure that any animals are kept away from public spaces. And you'll make sure that this building is absolutely spotless for this afternoon." She paused. "In fact, have Mr. Ward report to my office at noon. I want to discuss professional conduct personally." Jenkins's expression suggested this was a bad idea, but he was smart enough not to argue. "Yes, Ms. Hale. I'll let him know." "Good. That's all." After he left, Marcus lingered near the door. "Ms. Hale, you have a change of clothes in your executive suite. I can have your suit sent out for emergency cleaning, but honestly, given the timing, it's ruined. I know." Alexandra waved a hand dismissively. "Have my backup suit steamed and ready, and confirm with the catering company that everything will be perfect this afternoon. I want those investors to leave here ready to write checks." "Already done. Also, your father called. Twice. Alexandra's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? That you were in a meeting. Good. Keep telling him that. She turned back to the window. And Marcus? Coffee. Strong. On it. Alone again, Alexandra pressed her fingertips to the glass, watching the rain. Somewhere 42 floors below, Ethan Ward was probably cleaning up the mess his dog had made. Good. Let him understand what it meant to work for Hale Industries. Let him understand that there were standards, expectations, rules that applied to everyone. She ignored the small voice in the back of her mind asking why she was so angry. It was just a suit, just water, just a dog that probably hadn't meant any harm. But that voice sounded too much like her mother's, soft and forgiving. And Alexandra had learned long ago that softness was a luxury she couldn't afford. What? 4 floors below, in the building's maintenance office, Ethan Ward sat at a scarred metal desk with Sophie coloring beside him and Ranger lying at his feet. Daddy, why was that lady so mad? Sophie's crayon moved across the paper, creating what might have been a rainbow or possibly a very colorful disaster. It was hard to tell with Sophie's art. Because Ranger got her wet, sweetheart. Ethan kept his voice light, but his jaw was tight. But it was an accident. Ranger didn't mean to. I know that. You know that. But Ms. Hale doesn't know Ranger like we do. Sophie looked up, her 7-year-old face serious. She seemed really mean. Sophie. Ethan's tone held gentle warning. We don't call people mean. But she was. She yelled at you and you didn't do anything wrong. You were just trying to keep people safe. Sophie's eyes shone with the fierce loyalty of a child defending her parent. Mommy wouldn't have liked her. The mention of Sarah hit Ethan like it always did, a punch to the chest that he'd learned to absorb without showing. 3 years. And it still hurt. 3 years since the accident that had stolen his wife and nearly destroyed him. 3 years since he'd made the decision to leave the fire department, to choose safety and stability for Sophie's sake, even though it meant giving up the only job he'd ever loved. Maybe not, he admitted, reaching over to adjust Sophie's pigtail. But Mommy also taught us to be kind to everyone, remember? Even when they're having a bad day. Was Ms. Hale having a bad day? Maybe. Important people usually are. He stood, wincing slightly as his knee, the one that had been shattered in the same accident that killed Sarah, protested the movement. Come on, Bug. Let's get you set up with your homework in the break room. I've got to finish the inspection before lunch. Sophie gathered her crayons with exaggerated care, then paused. Daddy? Are you in trouble? No, baby. Everything's fine. But Sophie was her mother's daughter, perceptive beyond her years. You have your worried face. Ethan forced a smile. My worried face is just my regular face. I can't help it. It's genetics. That earned him a giggle, which was worth more than any argument. He gathered his inspection equipment while Sophie packed her coloring book, and Ranger stood stretching in that full-body way dogs did, completely unaware that he'd just made an enemy of the most powerful person in the building. Not that Ranger would have cared. The dog had been Ethan's salvation after Sarah died. A rescue from a kill shelter, skinny and scared, with eyes that held the same kind of broken that Ethan had seen in his own mirror. They'd saved each other, really. Ethan had trained Ranger the way he'd trained all the fire dogs he'd worked with in the FDNY. And Ranger had given him a reason to get out of bed when Sophie was at school and the apartment was too quiet. Now Ranger was more than a pet. He was family, the only co-worker who'd come with him from his old life to this new, diminished one. Mr. Ward? Ethan turned to find Carl Jenkins in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Hey, Carl, what's up? Ms. Hale wants to see you, noon, in her office. Jenkins rubbed the back of his neck. Look, Ethan, I don't know what to tell you. She's on the warpath about this morning. I figured. Ethan glanced at Sophie, who was pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. What does she want? To discuss professional conduct, according to her. Jenkins lowered his voice. Between you and me, I'd apologize, keep your head down, and make sure Ranger stays in the basement for a while. Ms. Hale's not someone you want to cross, especially today. She's got some big presentation this afternoon, and she's wound tighter than usual. Ethan thought about the woman he'd seen in the plaza. The cold eyes, the sharp voice, the complete lack of understanding or basic human decency. He thought about Sophie watching, learning that sometimes people with power treated people without it like they were disposable. "Sure," he said. "I'll be there." After Jenkins left, Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, you're making your worried face again." "Am I?" He smoothed his expression. "Must be the lighting." She giggled again, but her eyes remained concerned. At 7, she'd already learned that the world could be hard, that people you loved could disappear, that security was fragile. Ethan would have given anything to shield her from that knowledge, but life had taught them both harsh lessons. He got Sophie settled in the break room with Mrs. Chen from accounting, whose doctor's appointment had apparently been quick, and headed back down to the sub-basement with Ranger. The potential gas leak turned out to be nothing, just an old pipe that needed replacing and a ventilation issue that Ranger had flagged. False alarm, but better safe than sorry. That was the thing people like Alexandra Hale didn't understand. Buildings like this one, they were complex ecosystems. Hundreds of systems working together, thousands of potential failure points. The maintenance crews weren't just janitors and handymen. They were the reason the lights stayed on, the elevators ran, the water flowed. They were invisible until something went wrong. And then suddenly everyone wanted to know why they hadn't prevented the unprevented. Ethan had learned that lesson in the fire department. You could save 100 lives, but the one you couldn't save would haunt you forever. He pushed the thought away as he climbed the stairs. Elevators were for people who didn't know how quickly they could fail, and made his way to the maintenance office to write up his report. Standard procedure: document everything, note every finding, create a paper trail that proved you'd done your job correctly. At 11:45, he changed into his cleanest uniform, made sure his ID badge was straight, and gave Ranger a stern look. "You stay here, buddy, and try not to cause any more international incidents, okay?" Ranger's tail wagged, which wasn't exactly a promise, but was the best Ethan was going to get. The ride up to the 42nd floor felt longer than it should have. Ethan spent the time rehearsing apologies, trying to find words that would satisfy a woman who'd looked at his dog, his loyal, trained, life-saving dog, and seen only a nuisance. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a world that might as well have been on a different planet from the basement. Everything up here was pristine. The carpet was so plush his boots left impressions. The walls were decorated with modern art that probably cost more than his annual salary. The furniture in the waiting area looked like it belonged in a museum. A young man, probably close to Ethan's age, but somehow seeming younger, smoother, looked up from a desk that appeared to be made entirely of glass. "Can I help you?" "Ethan Ward, I have an appointment with Ms. Hale." The young man's expression shifted slightly, a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "Right, she's expecting you. Just a moment." He picked up a phone, murmured something, then gestured to the massive wooden door behind him. "You can go in." Ethan's hand was on the doorknob when the young man spoke again, quietly. "Good luck." That didn't bode well. He opened the door and stepped into Alexandra Hale's office. And despite everything, despite his anger and resentment, he couldn't help but be impressed. The view alone was breathtaking. The whole wall seemed to be made of glass, offering a panorama of Manhattan that made you feel like you could reach out and touch the clouds. But then his eyes found Alexandra, and the view became secondary. She stood by that massive window, backlit by the gray afternoon light, and she'd changed clothes. Now she wore a deep navy suit that probably cost as much as his used car, and her hair was still pulled back in that severe style that made her look like she was ready for war. She didn't turn around when he entered. "Mr. Ward, close the door, please." Ethan did, his hand lingering on the knob for a moment longer than necessary. He'd faced burning buildings with more confidence than he felt right now. "I suppose," Alexandra continued, still not turning around, "you're wondering why I asked you here. I figured it was about this morning." "Oh, it's definitely about this morning." Now she turned, and her eyes found his with laser precision. "Do you know what this afternoon represents for Hale Industries, Mr. Ward?" "No, ma'am." "We're demonstrating new fire safety sensor technology to a group of investors who could provide the funding to take this company to the next level. Years of development, millions of dollars in research, and it all comes down to a single presentation." She moved away from the window, circling toward her desk with the slow deliberation of a predator. "And this morning, Hours before that presentation, I had to stand in the rain while your dog created a spectacle that will probably be the subject of office gossip for weeks. I apologize for that. Ranger didn't mean, I don't care what he meant. Alexandra's voice was sharp. Intent is irrelevant. What matters is perception, Mr. Ward. What matters is that every person in this building understands that we have standards, that we expect professionalism, that we don't tolerate disruptions, no matter how well-intentioned. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He'd been in this position before, 3 years ago, standing in the fire chief's office while being told that he was a liability, that his injury made him unfit for duty, that there was no place for him in the department he'd served for 8 years. He'd swallowed his pride then, accepted the early medical retirement because Sophie needed him alive more than she needed him to be a hero. But this was different. This was about Ranger, about family, about being treated like he was worthless by someone who'd never spent a single day doing real work. With respect, Ms. Hale, Ranger was here for a safety inspection. He's trained to detect gas leaks, electrical fires, and other hazards that our equipment sometimes misses. In the past year alone, he's prevented— I don't care about his resume. Alexandra sat on the edge of her desk, a deliberately casual pose that somehow seemed more threatening than if she'd stayed standing. What I care about is that you brought an animal into my building without considering the consequences. What I care about is that you put your personal convenience ahead of professional standards. What I care about— my personal convenience? The words came out harder than Ethan had intended, but he was tired of being polite to people who treated him like he was invisible. Ms. Hale, with respect, Ranger isn't a pet. He's a working animal who's probably done more to keep this building safe than anyone in a suit has ever done. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Excuse me? Alexandra's voice was dangerously quiet. You asked me here to discuss professional conduct, so let's discuss it. Yes, Ranger got you wet this morning. That was an accident, and I apologize. But he was here doing his job, which is to make sure that this building, your building, doesn't have a gas leak that could kill everyone in it. That's not personal convenience. That's responsibility. Don't you dare! And as for your investors, Ethan continued, knowing he was probably getting himself fired but unable to stop. I hope your presentation goes well, I really do, but I also hope you've had the new fire sensor system properly inspected, because according to the installation reports I reviewed this morning, there are some concerns about the wiring integration that— That's enough! Alexandra stood, her eyes blazing. You're a maintenance worker, Mr. Ward, not an engineer, not a safety inspector, not someone whose opinion on our technology matters in the slightest. I'm someone who spent 8 years with the New York Fire Department responding to electrical fires caused by exactly the kind of rushed installations I'm seeing in the reports for your sensor system. Ethan held her gaze, refusing to back down. I'm someone who's pulled bodies out of buildings that caught fire because people were more worried about impressing investors than about doing things right. The silence that followed was absolute. Alexandra stared at him, and Ethan could see her rage warring with something else. Surprise, maybe, that he dared to push back. Get out, she said finally, her voice like ice. Get out of my office, get back to work, and keep that dog away from any area where I might have to see it. Do I make myself clear? Crystal. Ethan turned toward the door, his heart hammering. He'd probably just ended his career at Hale Industries, but at least he'd said what needed saying. He was almost to the door when Alexandra spoke again, and her voice was different now, less angry, more curious. Why did you leave the FDNY? Ethan's hand froze on the doorknob. Of all the questions he'd expected, that wasn't one of them. That's personal, he said without turning around. You just lectured me about professional responsibility. I think I'm entitled to know why someone with your alleged expertise is working as a building maintenance man instead of fighting fires. Ethan turned slowly. Alexandra hadn't moved, but something in her posture had changed. She looked less like an avenging CEO and more like a person who'd asked a genuine question. I got hurt, he said finally. Bad call, building collapse, shattered knee, fractured ribs, head trauma. They put me back together, but I wasn't fit for active duty anymore. He paused. And even if I had been, I have a daughter to think about. Sophie's already lost her mother. She doesn't need to lose her father, too. Something flickered across Alexandra's face, too quick to read, gone in an instant. I see, she said. Well, regardless of your background, my point stands. This is a corporate environment, Mr. Ward. We have rules for a reason. If you can't abide by them, I'm sure we can find someone who can. It was a dismissal and a threat wrapped into one. Ethan nodded once, turned, and left her office without another word. In the elevator, his hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, from adrenaline, from anger, from the sick feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake, but also from something else, from the memory of Alexandra Hale's face when he'd mentioned Sophie losing her mother. Just for a second, just for a heartbeat, the ice in her eyes had cracked, and behind it, he'd seen something that looked almost like pain. Back in her office, Alexandra stood by the window and tried to calm the trembling in her hands. She'd handled that poorly. She knew it. The confrontation had spiraled out of control, and she'd let her anger override her judgment. Now she had a maintenance worker who probably thought she was a monster and who might very well file a complaint about hostile work environment. But that wasn't what had her shaken. It was the mention of his daughter losing her mother. It was the quiet dignity in how he'd said it, without asking for sympathy or using it as an excuse. It was the fact that Ethan Ward had looked at her, actually looked at her, not through her or around her, and called her out on her priorities. And worst of all, he'd been right about the sensor system. Alexandra pulled up the installation reports on her laptop, scrolling through pages of technical specifications she'd only glanced at before. Her focus had been on the marketing, on the presentation, on showing investors that Hale Industries was on the cutting edge of safety technology. But there, buried in a footnote on page 47, was a notation about temporary wiring integration pending final inspection. Temporary. She picked up her phone. Marcus, get me Sarah Chen from Building Operations. That would be the Building Operations Manager, or, yes, the manager, now. 3 minutes later, Marcus ushered in a woman in her 40s who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Ms. Hale, you wanted to see me? The sensor system we're demonstrating this afternoon. Is it fully integrated? Sarah Chen hesitated, which was answer enough. The sensors themselves are functioning perfectly. The display system is ready. It's just the connection to the building's emergency systems that's still being what? Calibrated. The new sensors need to interface with the existing elevator shutdown protocols. And there were some unexpected complications with complications. Alexandra's stomach sank. Why wasn't I informed? I sent a memo 3 days ago outlining the timeline. We're technically within the acceptable delay window for this type of installation, and we're demonstrating this system to investors in 4 hours. Alexandra's mind raced. Can we disconnect the integration? Run the sensors independently? Yes, but that defeats the whole purpose. The selling point is that the system automatically shuts down elevators and activates emergency protocols without human intervention. If we demonstrate it as a standalone, then it's just an expensive smoke detector. Alexandra closed her eyes. Ethan Ward had been right. She'd been so focused on the presentation, on impressing people, on proving herself, that she'd overlooked basic safety protocols. What do you recommend? She asked. Sarah looked surprised to be consulted. Honestly? Postpone the demonstration until the integration is complete. That could take another week, maybe 2, but that's not an option. These investors are flying in specifically for this. If we postpone, we'll lose them. Alexandra's mind worked through the possibilities. Can we do a controlled demonstration? Show them the sensor capability without activating the full integration? Yes, but you'll need to be very clear about the limitations. And you absolutely cannot test the emergency protocols with the elevators in use. The system isn't stable enough yet. Fine. Prepare a modified demonstration plan. I want it on my desk in an hour. Yes, ma'am. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. Ms. Hale, for what it's worth, Ethan Ward flagged this exact concern in his safety review last week. I forwarded it to your office, but I didn't read it. Alexandra's voice was flat. Thank you, Ms. Chen. That will be all. After Sarah left, Alexandra sat down at her desk and pulled up her email. There it was, a week-old subject line. Safety concerns. New sensor system integration. She'd deleted it without reading it, assumed it was just another maintenance worker overstepping his bounds, trying to feel important. Her phone buzzed, her father's number. She let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, Marcus appeared in her doorway. "Your father called again? He says it's urgent." "It's always urgent." Alexandra rubbed her temples. "Tell him I'll call him back after the presentation." "He specifically said—" "I don't care what he specifically said, Marcus." She looked up, saw his concern, and softened her tone fractionally. "I'll handle my father. Right now I need to focus on making sure this demonstration doesn't become a disaster." "Of course." Marcus retreated, and Alexandra was alone again with her thoughts and her mistakes. Through her window, she could see the rain continuing to fall, turning the city into a watercolor of grays and silvers. Somewhere in the building below, Ethan Ward was probably getting back to work, taking care of the invisible systems that kept everything running while people like her took the credit. She thought about his daughter, Sophie, the little girl in the yellow raincoat with the lopsided pigtails, about what it must be like to lose your mother that young, about what it must be like to be Ethan Ward trying to raise a child alone while working a job that people like Alexandra dismissed as menial. Her mother had died when Alexandra was 12, not suddenly, like Sophie's mother apparently had, but slowly, eaten away by cancer over 18 terrible months. Alexandra remembered sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, watching her disappear by degrees. She remembered the last thing her mother had said to her. "Don't become your father, sweetheart. Don't forget how to be kind." Alexandra had failed that instruction spectacularly. She stood, moved back to the window, and stared out at the city that had always felt more like home than any house ever had. This was her kingdom, built on ambition and calculation and careful control. There was no room in it for kindness, for dogs that shook rein on expensive suits, for maintenance workers who dared to question her judgment. But there was also no room in it for the kind of person her mother would have been proud of. The thought sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and uncomfortable. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing everything clean or dirty depending on your perspective. And somewhere below, in the basement levels where the real work happened, a dog with muddy paws waited for his owner to come back, completely unaware that he'd just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. The clock on Alexandra's wall ticked toward 2 p.m. In a few hours, she'd stand before a room full of investors and demonstrate technology that wasn't quite ready, in a building maintained by people she didn't respect, saved from disaster by warnings she'd ignored. Excellence isn't a goal. It's a baseline. Her father's voice. Always her father's voice. Alexandra turned from the window, straightened her jacket, and prepared to be excellent. She had no idea that excellence was the least of what she was about to need. The hours between noon and 2 o'clock passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Alexandra reviewed the modified demonstration plan 3 times, made Sarah Chen walk her through every technical detail, and personally inspected the conference room where the presentation would take place. Everything had to be perfect. Not because perfection mattered to the investors. They cared about returns, not aesthetics, but because control was the only thing standing between her and the chaos that always threatened to break through. By 1:45, the investors had begun arriving. Alexandra greeted each one with the practiced charm that had taken her years to master. Richard Castellano from Apex Ventures, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, who'd made his fortune betting on technology before it was ready. Jennifer Wu, whose venture capital firm specialized in safety and infrastructure. Thomas Brighton, old money and older ideas, who'd nevertheless backed 3 of her previous projects. And finally, David Torres, young and hungry, representing a consortium of international investors who could single-handedly fund the next phase of Hale Industries' expansion. "Alexandra, wonderful to see you." Richard shook her hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms. "We're very excited about what you have to show us." "And I'm excited to show you." Alexandra smiled, the expression feeling like a mask she'd worn so many times it had become part of her face. "This technology is going to revolutionize building safety protocols. We're talking about systems that can detect and respond to fire hazards before human operators even know there's a problem." "Ambitious," Jennifer observed, her tone suggesting she'd heard ambitious claims before and watched them fail. "Necessary," Alexandra countered. Every year, hundreds of people die in building fires that could have been prevented with faster response times. Our system cuts detection time by 70% and automates emergency protocols that currently rely on human judgment. She was in her element now, confident and commanding. This was what she was good at, not messy emotions or interpersonal complications, but clean presentations of data and vision. The investors followed her to the conference room, where a bank of monitors displayed real-time data from the sensor network installed throughout the building. As you can see, Alexandra began, pulling up a schematic of Hale Industries' 43 floors, we've installed next-generation thermal sensors at key points throughout the building. These sensors don't just detect smoke. They detect temperature anomalies, air quality changes, even subtle chemical signatures that indicate combustion before visible smoke appears. She clicked through slides showing response times, comparative data, testimonials from fire departments that had tested the system. The investors leaned forward, interested. This was going well. Now, in a traditional system, these sensors would trigger an alarm and rely on building occupants to respond appropriately. But we all know that in emergency situations, people panic. They make poor decisions. They waste precious seconds. Alexandra's voice was steady, authoritative. Our system eliminates that variable. The moment a sensor detects a potential fire hazard, it automatically initiates emergency protocols. Elevators return to ground floor and shut down. Emergency lighting activates. Ventilation systems adjust to contain smoke, all without requiring a single human decision. Impressive, David Torres murmured. What's the failure rate? In laboratory conditions, less than 0.03%. In real-world testing, we're seeing... The lights flickered. It was just a moment, a barely perceptible dimming, but Alexandra's words died in her throat. The monitors wavered, their displays glitching for a heartbeat before stabilizing. Power fluctuation, she said smoothly, recovering. We're running extensive diagnostics today, which sometimes causes minor... The lights flickered again, longer this time. One of the monitors went black. Is this part of the demonstration? Richard asked, his tone suggesting he knew it wasn't. No, this is... Alexandra crossed to the phone on the conference table, punched the button for building operations. Sarah, what's happening? Sarah Chen's voice came through tight with stress. We're seeing power irregularities in the main distribution panel. The new sensor system is drawing more load than anticipated, and it's causing fluctuations in... Fix it. Alexandra kept her voice calm, aware of 4 pairs of investor eyes watching her. We're in the middle of a presentation. We're working on it, but Ms. Hale, I really think we should shut down the sensor integration until we can, not an option, stabilize it. Alexandra ended the call and turned back to her audience with a confident smile that felt like lying. Minor technical issue. This is exactly why we conduct extensive testing, to identify and resolve these kinds of integration challenges before full deployment. But Jennifer Wu was frowning at her phone. I'm getting reports from my office. Are your elevators working? Alexandra's stomach dropped. Excuse me? My assistant just texted. She's stuck in elevator 3. Says it stopped moving about 2 minutes ago. Before Alexandra could respond, the conference room phone rang. She answered it, already knowing it was going to be bad news. Ms. Hale, this is security? We have a situation. Elevator 3 is stuck between floors 18 and 19. We're showing 3 passengers inside, and the security officer's voice dropped. Ma'am, the sensors are detecting smoke. The world seemed to tilt. Alexandra's training kicked in, years of crisis management protocols flooding her mind with procedures and priorities. But underneath the professional calm, terror was rising like water in a flooding room. Get the fire department, she said, her voice steady despite the fear. Initiate emergency protocols, and find out where that smoke is coming from. She hung up and looked at the investors. Their expressions ranged from concern to barely concealed calculation, already wondering if this was a disaster they wanted to be associated with. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but we're going to need to pause this presentation. We have an elevator emergency that requires my immediate attention. If you'll please follow my assistant to the guest lounge, I'll update you as soon as... We'll stay, Richard said quietly. If your system works the way you say it does, now's the time to prove it. Alexandra wanted to argue, wanted to usher them away from what was rapidly becoming a nightmare. But he was right. This was the ultimate test. Either her technology would save lives, or it would fail spectacularly in front of the people who could make or break her company. Very well. She turned to Marcus, who'd appeared in the doorway looking pale. Get me a direct line to the elevator control room, and find Sarah Chen. I need to know exactly what's happening. The next 10 minutes were chaos. Alexandra stood in the conference room, phone pressed to her ear, while reports flooded in from across the building. The power fluctuations were getting worse. The sensor system's integration with the building's electrical grid was creating feedback loops. And worst of all, Elevator 3 was stuck between floors with 3 people inside, 2 executives from different companies who'd been visiting Hale Industries, and Jennifer Wu's assistant, who'd been on her way to the presentation. We can't get to them, the fire chief told her over the phone. The elevator shaft access doors are on the automatic lock system, and your sensor network is treating this like an active fire. It's locked down everything. We can't override it without shutting down power to that section, but that could cause the elevator to drop if the brakes fail. What about the smoke? Alexandra asked, her hand gripping the phone so hard her knuckles were white. Is there an actual fire? We're not sure. The sensors are definitely detecting something, but we can't confirm visual smoke yet. The problem is, your system is designed to respond to potential threats, and right now it's responding to its own electrical interference. It's basically chasing its own tail. This was exactly what Ethan Ward had warned about. The rushed integration, the untested protocols, the focus on impressing investors rather than ensuring safety. Alexandra felt sick. How long until you can get them out? She asked. Could be 30 minutes. Could be an hour. We're bringing in specialized equipment, but... The fire chief paused. Ms. Hale, I'm going to be straight with you. If there really is smoke in that elevator, those people don't have an hour. We need to get to them now. Alexandra looked at the investors, all of whom were now on their phones, probably already drafting exit strategies. She looked at the monitors showing her building's systems slowly eating themselves. She thought about 3 people trapped in a metal box, potentially breathing smoke, while she stood in a comfortable conference room and watched her empire crumble. Then she thought about Ethan Ward's face when he told her about pulling bodies out of buildings. She made a decision. Keep working on it, she told the fire chief. I'm sending someone who might be able to help. She hung up and turned to Marcus. Find Ethan Ward. Tell him I need him in the elevator control room immediately. Marcus blinked. The maintenance worker. The firefighter, Alexandra corrected. The one I should have listened to 3 hours ago. Find him. Now. As Marcus ran from the room, Alexandra pulled up the building schematic on the main monitor. Elevator 3 was visible as a small red box suspended in the shaft, a digital representation of real people in real danger. The sensor readings around it showed elevated temperature and trace chemical signatures consistent with electrical fire. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back, a trick her father had taught her when she was 16 and giving her first presentation. Never let them see you scared. Never let them see you doubt. Confidence is 90% of success. But confidence couldn't save the people in that elevator. 4 floors below, in the maintenance office, Ethan was reviewing inspection reports when Marcus burst through the door, breathless and wild-eyed. Mr. Ward, Ms. Hale needs you in the elevator control room. Now. It's an emergency. Ethan was on his feet immediately, his firefighter instincts overriding everything else. What kind of emergency? Elevator stuck between floors, 3 people trapped, possible smoke. Marcus was already moving toward the door. Please, she said you'd know what to do. Ethan grabbed his inspection kit and whistled sharply. Ranger's head popped up from where he'd been dozing under the desk. Come on, boy, we've got work. They ran, Ethan's damaged knee protesting but holding. Ranger loping beside him with the focused intensity of a working dog who knew something important was happening. The elevator control room was in the basement, a cramped space filled with decades-old equipment and the new sensor displays that had been hastily installed over the past month. Sarah Chen was there, along with 2 technicians and a fire department liaison. They all turned when Ethan entered, their faces showing various degrees of relief and skepticism. Thank God, Sarah said. Ethan, we're locked out of the system. The sensors detected something in the shaft near elevator 3, and now the whole emergency protocol is running on automatic. We can't override it without risking a catastrophic failure. Ethan moved to the main panel, his eyes scanning the displays. Years of training kicked in, patterns jumping out at him that the others probably couldn't see. Show me the temperature readings. Sarah pulled up a detailed schematic. The area around elevator 3 was showing elevated heat signatures, but they were inconsistent, flickering, pulsing, not the steady increase you'd expect from a real fire. That's electrical interference, Ethan said immediately. The sensors are detecting the electromagnetic feedback from the integration system itself. It's a false positive. We know that, one of the technicians snapped, but the system doesn't. It thinks there's a fire, so it's locked down everything. Can we manually override the shaft access doors? Ethan asked. Not without shutting down the sensor network entirely, and that would take at least 20 minutes of... We don't have 20 minutes. Ethan's mind was racing, running through every building rescue he'd ever done, every training scenario, every emergency protocol he drilled into his bones during 8 years with the FDNY. What about the emergency access shaft? The maintenance ladders? Sarah's eyes widened. Yes, but they haven't been inspected in months, and they're not designed for... They're designed exactly for this. Ethan was already moving toward the door. I need a respirator, a pry bar, and a safety harness, and I need them 2 minutes ago. You can't go up there, the fire department liaison protested. That shaft isn't secured. If the elevator moves, it's not going to move. The system locked it down, remember? Ethan's voice was calm but absolute. Those people are breathing smoke, maybe real, maybe from electrical fire, doesn't matter. Either way, they're in danger. We can sit here and wait for the official response, or we can get them out now. Your choice. The liaison looked like he wanted to argue, but Sarah was already pulling equipment from the emergency locker. I'll help you. No. Ethan's tone was firm. I need you here monitoring the system. If anything changes, if you see any sign that the elevator might move, you radio me immediately. Understand? Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. Ethan turned to Ranger, who'd been sitting alert through the entire exchange. The dog's eyes were locked on him, waiting for a command. Ethan knelt down, checking Ranger's vest, the one he'd custom-made with reflective strips and a small pouch for emergency equipment. You remember your training, buddy? Ethan asked softly. Smoke detection, not rescue. If I tell you to stay, you stay. Got it? Ranger's tail wagged once, a serious acknowledgement rather than playful enthusiasm. Good boy! Ethan stood and took the equipment Sarah handed him, a respirator mask, a professional-grade pry bar, a climbing harness with carabiners, and a radio. Let's go save some people. The maintenance access to the elevator shaft was through a service corridor that smelled like oil and old concrete. Ethan had been through it 100 times during his inspections, but never like this, never with his heart pounding and his old training screaming at him to be careful, to wait for backup, to not take unnecessary risks. But there were people trapped, possibly dying, and he'd sworn an oath once, years ago, to help people in danger. Leaving the FDNY hadn't changed that. The access door was locked, secured by the same automatic system that had sealed everything else. Ethan examined the mechanism, found the manual override, a blessing from an era before everything was computerized, and forced it open. The shaft beyond was dark, illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast everything in sickly red. This is Ward, he said into his radio. I'm entering the shaft. Confirm elevator position. Sarah's voice crackled back. Elevator 3 is stationary between floors 18 and 19. You'll need to climb 17 flights to reach the access point. 17 flights, in a dark shaft, with a dog, while 3 people slowly suffocated. Copy that, Ethan said, starting ascent. The maintenance ladder was exactly as unpleasant as he'd expected. Narrow metal rungs bolted to the shaft wall, slick with decades of accumulated moisture and grime. Ethan clipped his harness to the safety cable that ran alongside the ladder, tested his weight, and began to climb. Ranger stayed close, moving with surprising grace for a 70-pound dog. Ethan had trained him for situations like this back in the FDNY, teaching him to navigate ladders and narrow spaces, though he'd never expected to actually need those skills again. The climb was brutal. Ethan's knees screamed with every step, the old injury making itself known in ways it hadn't in months. Sweat poured down his face, despite the shaft's chill. His breathing came hard and fast, regulated by training but still labored. 5 floors. 10. The shaft was a vertical tunnel of darkness broken only by the red emergency lights and the faint glow of the elevator doors on each level. Ethan could hear the building around him, the hum of machinery, the distant sound of voices, the creak of metal settling. At floor 15, Ranger stopped and whined softly. Ethan froze, his instincts immediately alert. "What is it, boy?" Ranger's nose was working, his head tilted up toward the levels above. Then he did something that made Ethan's blood run cold. He gave 3 sharp barks in rapid succession. The smoke signal. "Sarah, this is Ward," Ethan said into his radio, keeping his voice calm. "Rangers detecting smoke. Real smoke, not just sensor ghosts. What are the readings showing?" A pause, then Sarah's voice, tight with tension. "Temperatures climbing near the elevator, slowly but definitely increasing. Ethan, I think there's an actual electrical fire developing. The feedback from the sensor system might have triggered a short in the elevator's control panel." Of course. The false alarm was becoming a real emergency, fed by the very system designed to prevent it. Ethan had seen it before, cascading failures, where one problem triggered another until a minor issue became a catastrophe. "Copy that. Continuing ascent. Have the fire department standing by." He climbed faster now, ignoring the pain in his knee, ignoring the burning in his lungs. Ranger kept pace, his training overriding his instincts to flee from the smell of smoke. Floor 1718. Ethan could see it now. A faint haze in the shaft, visible in the emergency lighting. Real smoke, thin but definitely present. And beyond it, the dark bulk of Elevator 3, suspended in the shaft like a coffin. "Elevator 3. This is building maintenance," Ethan called out as he approached. "Can you hear me?" Silence. Then a voice, faint and desperate. "Yes, yes, we're here. Please, we can't breathe. There's smoke." "I know. Stay calm. I'm going to get you out." Ethan positioned himself on the ladder next to the elevator's emergency access hatch on top of the car. The hatch was designed to open from the outside, but it required leverage and strength that was hard to apply while clinging to a ladder. He secured his harness to an anchor point, making sure he was stable, then wedged the pry bar into the hatch's seal. "This is Ward. I'm at the elevator." "Starting extraction." "Copy," Sarah said. "Be advised, temperature is still climbing. You need to move fast." The hatch resisted, sealed by years of disuse and safety mechanisms that didn't want to cooperate. Ethan threw his weight against the pry bar, felt it give slightly, then slip. He repositioned, tried again. Inside the elevator, someone was coughing, deep, racking coughs that spoke of smoke inhalation. "Hang on," Ethan called. "Just hang on!" He levered the pry bar again, and this time the hatch gave way with a screech of metal. Smoke poured out of the opening, thicker than Ethan had expected. He pulled his respirator on, then peered down through the hatch. 3 faces looked up at him from the smoke-filled interior, 2 men in business suits, looking terrified, and a young woman who was holding a damp cloth over her mouth and nose. "Okay, listen to me carefully," Ethan said, his voice muffled by the respirator. "I'm going to lower a ladder through this hatch. One at a time, you're going to climb up and out. Then we're going down the maintenance ladder to safety. Can you do that?" "The smoke!" one of the men gasped. Can't breathe." "I know. That's why we're moving now." Ethan pulled a collapsible emergency ladder from his kit, standard firefighter equipment he'd insisted on including in his inspection gear. He hooked it to the hatch opening and lowered it into the elevator. "Lady first," he ordered. "Come on. You can do this." The young woman, Jennifer Wu's assistant, he realized, moved toward the ladder. Her hands were shaking, but she grasped the rungs and began to climb. Ethan reached down, grabbed her arms as she neared the top, and hauled her through the hatch onto the top of the elevator car. "There's a ladder on the wall," he told her, pointing. "Climb down slowly. Don't look down. Just focus on the next rung. My dog will go with you. Ranger, guide." Ranger moved past her, beginning to descend, and the young woman followed with the desperate focus of someone who'd just been given a chance to survive. "Next," Ethan called into the elevator. The process repeated. One man, then the other, each struggling through the smoke and fear but making it out of the elevator and onto the ladder. The smoke was getting thicker and Ethan could see flames now, small but growing, licking at the elevator's control panel. "Sarah, we're evacuating," Ethan reported. "But this fire's going to spread. You need to activate the suppression systems for this shaft." "If I do that with people in the shaft, we'll be fine. But this elevator's going to go up like a torch if we don't contain it." He didn't wait for confirmation. The last of the three, one of the businessmen, was on the ladder now, climbing down with agonizing slowness. Ethan followed, positioning himself above to catch the man if he fell. The descent was a nightmare. 4 people and a dog on a ladder in a smoke-filled shaft, with fire growing above them, and 17 floors between them and safety. Ethan's radio crackled with updates. Fire department arriving, suppression systems activating, emergency crews staging on multiple floors. Floor by floor, they descended. The businessman above Ethan was flagging, his movements becoming sluggish. Smoke inhalation, exhaustion, fear, all taking their toll. "Stay with me," Ethan commanded. 5 more floors, you can do 5 more floors." "Can't." The man's hand slipped on a rung. Ethan moved purely on instinct, reaching up and grabbing the man's harness. Thank God he'd insisted they clip in, and taking his weight. His shoulder screamed in protest. His knee buckled, but his grip held. "I've got you," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "I've got you. Keep moving." The man found his footing again, kept climbing. Above them, Ethan could hear the whoosh of the suppression system activating, foam and chemicals flooding into the elevator shaft. The fire's glow dimmed, then disappeared. At floor 5, emergency responders met them, pulling the survivors off the ladder and into the corridor where paramedics waited. Ethan climbed down last, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, his lungs burning despite the respirator. He pulled the mask off as his boots hit solid ground, and the first thing he saw was Ranger sitting at attention, tail wagging slowly, his good job expression firmly in place. "Good boy," Ethan managed, his voice hoarse. "Such a good boy." Then the paramedics were surrounding him, checking his vitals, asking questions he answered on autopilot. He was fine, just tired, just sore, just done. "Mr. Ward." He looked up to find Alexandra Hale standing in the corridor, and for a second he didn't recognize her. Her perfect hair had come loose from its severe style. Her makeup was smudged. Her expression was something he'd never seen before. Raw, unguarded, absolutely terrified. "Are they—" Her voice cracked. "Are they alive?" "They're alive," Ethan confirmed. "Smoke inhalation, some minor injuries, but they'll be okay." Alexandra's legs seemed to give out. She caught herself against the wall, one hand pressed to her chest as if trying to hold something inside. "Thank God. Thank God." Ethan watched her, this woman who'd mocked his dog, dismissed his warnings, treated him like he was worthless. She looked nothing like the cold CEO from this morning. She looked human, scared, grateful, lost. "Ms. Hale, I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush, desperate and sincere. "I'm so sorry. You were right. About everything. The system, the integration, the risks. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. I was so focused on the presentation, on impressing people, on proving—" She stopped, seemed to realize she was babbling, and took a shaking breath. "You saved their lives. After everything I said to you, after how I treated you, you still saved them." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about saying something cutting, something that would make her feel worse, something that would balance the scales for this morning's humiliation. But he was too tired, and she looked too broken, and 3 people were alive who might not have been. "We're safe," he said simply. "That's what matters." Behind her, security personnel were arriving and official responders, and probably building management ready to start damage control. Alexandra straightened, visibly pulling herself together, the mask of the CEO sliding back into place. But her eyes, when they met Ethan's, were still raw. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll never forget this." Then she turned and was swept away into the chaos of crisis management, leaving Ethan standing in the corridor with Ranger at his side and the knowledge that something had fundamentally changed. He'd saved lives today. Done the job he'd trained for, the job he'd loved, the job he'd thought he'd lost forever. And somewhere in the process, he'd seen past Alexandra Hale's armor to the frightened, lonely person underneath. It didn't excuse her behavior, didn't make them friends, Didn't change the power imbalance between them or the fact that she could still fire him on a whim. But it was something. A crack in the ice. A moment of genuine humanity in a woman who'd seemed to have forgotten what humanity was. Ethan gathered his equipment, called Ranger to heal, and headed back toward the basement. His knee was agony now, his shoulder burning, his lungs still clearing smoke. But he'd saved 3 people today, and for the first time since leaving the FDNY, he felt like himself again. Behind him, sirens continued to wail, and the building's alarms finally, belatedly, began to sound their warning to a danger that had already passed. The hours following the rescue blurred together in a haze of interviews, incident reports, and damage assessment. Ethan spent most of that time in the building's medical station, refusing to go to the hospital despite the paramedics' recommendations. His knee was swollen to twice its normal size. His shoulder had pulled something that made lifting his arm an exercise in controlled agony, and his throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. But Sophie was still in the building with Mrs. Chen, and he wasn't leaving without her. "Daddy!" She burst into the medical station at 6 o'clock, her yellow raincoat abandoned somewhere, her pigtails even more lopsided than they'd been that morning. "Daddy, everyone's saying you're a hero. Mrs. Chen said you climbed into a fire and saved people and Ranger helped, and are you okay? You look really tired." Ethan opened his arms and she crashed into him, careful even in her excitement not to hurt him. 7 years old and already so aware of how fragile things could be. "I'm okay, Bug. Just a little sore. Mrs. Chen says you shouldn't have gone up there. She says it was dangerous and you could have died." Sophie's voice was small now, scared. "But you didn't die, right? You're really okay?" "I'm really okay." Ethan hugged her tighter, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "I promise." "Good." She pulled back, her small face serious. "Because I already lost Mommy, and if I lost you too, I don't know what I'd do." The words hit him like a physical blow. This was what he'd been trying to avoid, putting Sophie through more loss, more fear, more reasons to wake up at night wondering if the people she loved would still be there in the morning. He'd taken the maintenance job specifically because it was safe, because it meant coming home every night, because it meant Sophie would never have to get the visit from the fire chief telling her that Daddy wasn't coming back. And today he'd broken that implicit promise, climbed into danger without thinking about what it would mean for her if something went wrong. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have thought about you first." "No." Sophie shook her head with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "You should have thought about the people who needed help first." That's what Mommy would have said. That's what heroes do. Ethan's throat tightened. Sarah had said exactly that years ago when he'd talked about leaving the department after Sophie was born. "Someone has to help people, Ethan, and you're really, really good at it. Don't give that up just because it's scary." But then Sarah had died, and scary had become unbearable. "Come on," he said, standing with a groan that made Sophie's eyes widen with concern. "Let's get Ranger and go home." They found Ranger in the maintenance office, lying under Ethan's desk where he'd retreated after all the chaos. The dog's tail thumped when he saw them, but he didn't get up immediately, unusual for Ranger, who typically greeted them both like they'd been gone for years instead of hours. "Is he okay?" Sophie asked, kneeling beside him. Ethan crouched down, ignoring his knee's protest, and checked Ranger over. The dog's paws were tender from the ladder climb, and there was a singed patch on his vest where an ember must have landed, but otherwise he seemed fine. Just exhausted, like Ethan. "He's okay. Just tired." Ethan scratched behind Ranger's ears. "You did good today, buddy. You did really good." Ranger's tail wagged harder, and he finally stood, stretching in that full-body way that made Sophie giggle despite everything. They were gathering their things when Carl Jenkins appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "Ethan, got a minute?" Ethan glanced at Sophie, who immediately picked up on the adult conversation cues. "Can I go to show Ranger to Mr. Martinez? He's been asking about him." "Sure, Bug. Stay in the hallway where I can see you." After Sophie left, dragging Ranger behind her, Jenkins stepped into the office and closed the door part way. "So, hell of a day. That's one way to put it. The executives you pulled out are doing fine. Some smoke inhalation, but they'll make full recoveries. Their companies are already talking about sending letters of commendation, maybe even some kind of reward. Jenkins paused. Ms. Hale wants to see you. Ethan's jaw tightened. When? Now, if you're up to it. She's in her office. And if I'm not up to it? Then I guess it waits until tomorrow. Jenkins studied him. Look, I don't know what's going through her head right now, but I've worked for Alexandra Hale for 7 years, and I've never seen her look the way she did when she watched you bring those people out. Whatever she wants to say, I think you should hear it. Ethan wanted to refuse. Wanted to go home, ice his knee, and pretend this day had never happened. But Jenkins was right. Something had shifted. And as much as he wanted to avoid another confrontation with the Ice Queen CEO, he owed it to himself to face whatever came next. Fine, give me 10 minutes to get Sophie settled. He found Mrs. Chen and asked if she could watch Sophie for a little while longer. The older woman agreed immediately, her eyes full of concern and what looked like pride. You take your time. Sophie can help me finish organizing the supply closet. She's been a wonderful helper today. Ethan kissed the top of Sophie's head. I'll be right back, okay? Ranger stays with you. Where are you going? Just to talk to Ms. Hale for a minute. Sophie's expression became guarded. The mean lady? Sophie? Sorry, the lady who was mean this morning but probably feels bad now. Sophie looked up at him with those two wise eyes. You're going to be nice to her, right? Even though she wasn't nice to you? Yes, Ethan said, meaning it. I'm going to be nice. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different this time. The car still smelled faintly of smoke, and someone had taped an out-of-order sign on Elevator 3's doors on every floor. The building felt changed somehow, like a house after a close call, still standing, but aware of its own mortality. Marcus wasn't at his desk when Ethan arrived. The waiting area was empty, the lights dimmed. Through Alexandra's office door, he could see her silhouette against the darkening sky. The rain had finally stopped, and sunset was painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Ethan knocked softly. Come in. He stepped inside and was struck by how different the office felt from this morning. It was still impressive, still intimidating, but somehow smaller, more human. Alexandra stood by the window with her arms wrapped around herself, and she'd changed clothes again, now wearing slacks and a simple blouse, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger like this. Vulnerable. Mr. Ward. She turned, and in the sunset light he could see that her eyes were red. She'd been crying. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. Mr. Jenkins said you wanted to see me. I did. I do. She gestured to the chairs near her desk. Please, sit. I'd rather stand if that's okay. My knee doesn't do well with sitting right now. Of course, She stopped, seemed to gather herself. How are you feeling? Sore? Tired? But I'll live. And the people you rescued? According to the doctors, they'll make full recoveries. Alexandra's shoulders sagged with visible relief. Thank God. I've been getting updates every hour, but hearing it from you somehow makes it more real. She moved away from the window, closer to him but still maintaining distance. Mr. Ward, Ethan, I asked you here because I owe you an apology. A real one, not the corporate speak I'm sure you're expecting. Ethan waited, saying nothing. This morning, I was cruel to you, Alexandra continued, her voice steady but strained. I mocked your dog. I dismissed your concerns. I treated you like you were beneath my notice, like your job made you less than human. And I did all of that because... She stopped, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Because that's what I've been taught to do. My father raised me to believe that success means control, that compassion is weakness, that the only thing that matters is results. She laughed, a bitter sound. And today, my obsession with results nearly killed 3 people, while you, the man I belittled, whose warnings I ignored, risked your life to save them. I was just doing my job, Ethan said. No. Alexandra's eyes met his, fierce now. You went beyond your job. You climbed into a dangerous situation that any reasonable person would have avoided. You used skills you learned in a career you gave up, with a dog I called filthy, to save people you didn't know. That's not a job. That's heroism. The word hung in the air between them, uncomfortable and true. Ms. Hale, Alexandra, please, I think after today we can dispense with the formalities. Alexandra, Ethan corrected, testing the name. I appreciate the apology, truly, but you don't owe me anything. I didn't do it for recognition or gratitude. I did it because people needed help. I know, that's what makes it extraordinary. She moved to her desk, picked up a folder, then seemed to change her mind and set it down again. Can I ask you something? This morning you mentioned pulling bodies out of buildings. How many? The question caught Ethan off guard. I'm sorry? How many people have you pulled out of buildings? Over your career with the FDNY? Ethan thought about it. I don't know. Dozens, maybe more. We didn't really keep count. And how many didn't make it? The memories came flooding back, faces, names, moments when he'd been too late, or the fire had been too fierce, or luck had simply run out. Enough, he said quietly. More than enough. Alexandra nodded slowly. My mother died when I was 12. Cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to death, and there wasn't a single thing anyone could do to stop it. Her voice was carefully controlled, but Ethan could hear the old pain underneath. I remember feeling so helpless, so angry that all our money, all my father's power and connections couldn't save her. And I think, she paused, swallowing hard, I think I've spent the last 20 years trying to never feel that helpless again. Trying to control everything, to anticipate every problem, to be so perfect that nothing bad could ever touch me. That's not how life works, Ethan said gently. I know that now. Alexandra's smile was sad. Today taught me that in the most brutal way possible. All my control, all my planning, all my perfect systems, they nearly killed 3 people. And the only thing that saved them was someone I'd treated with contempt. She walked back to the window, her arms wrapped around herself again. I've spent the last 6 hours on phone calls, with the investors, who understandably want nothing to do with us now, with the fire marshal, who's launching a full investigation, with our insurance company, who's already talking about liability, with the families of the people you saved, who can't stop thanking me for something I didn't do. You built this company, Ethan offered. You created jobs, developed technology. I created a death trap. Alexandra's voice was harsh now. Let's not pretend otherwise. I pushed for a demonstration of a system that wasn't ready because I was more concerned with impressing investors than ensuring safety. That's not leadership. That's vanity. Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right, and they both knew it. So what happens now? He asked. Alexandra turned to face him. Now I do what I should have done weeks ago. I listen to the people who actually know what they're talking about. I halt the censor program until every safety concern has been addressed. I hire independent consultants to review our procedures, and I make sure that nothing like today ever happens again. That's a good start. It's the bare minimum. She moved closer, and Ethan could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. But I also want to do more. I want to acknowledge what you and Ranger did today, publicly, properly. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. That's not necessary. Yes, it is. For the building, for morale, for... She stopped. For me, I need people to know that I was wrong, that you were right, that the person I dismissed saved lives while the person everyone respects nearly ended them. Alexandra, please. The word was quiet, almost desperate. Please let me do this. Let me try to make this right. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the CEO, past the ice queen, past the woman who'd made his morning miserable. He saw someone trying, genuinely trying, to be better than she'd been. Someone who'd had her worldview shattered and was struggling to build something new from the pieces. Okay, he said finally. But nothing elaborate, no press conferences, no photo opportunities, just simple acknowledgement. Relief flooded Alexandra's face. Thank you. And there's something else. She moved to her desk, picked up the folder she'd been holding earlier. This is a formal commendation for your personnel file, a raise effective immediately, and a new position, Director of Building Safety. You'd oversee all maintenance operations with a focus on emergency preparedness and hazard prevention. Ethan stared at her. I'm not qualified for that. You're the most qualified person in this building. You have 8 years of firefighting experience, specialized training in rescue operations, and you clearly understand building systems better than our engineers do. Alexandra held out the folder. Plus, you're the only person who's proven willing to tell me when I'm wrong. That's invaluable. Ethan didn't know what to say. This morning he'd been worried about getting fired. Now he was being offered a promotion that would change everything. More money, more responsibility, more stability for Sophie. I need to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need. Alexandra set the folder on her desk. But Ethan, I meant what I said earlier. Thank you. Not just for today, but for trying to warn me. For doing the right thing even when I made it clear your opinion didn't matter. For being better than I deserved. The sunset had deepened outside, painting the office in shades of orange and purple. In that light, Alexandra Hale looked nothing like the woman who'd berated him in the rain that morning. She looked human, fallible, and genuinely remorseful. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Of course. Why did you become like this? So focused on control, on perfection? He raised a hand before she could take offense. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm genuinely curious. Because the woman standing here apologizing isn't the same woman who called Ranger filthy this morning. Alexandra was quiet for a long moment. My father, she said finally. Charles Hale. You've probably heard of him. Ethan had. The name was legendary in New York business circles. The real estate developer. Among other things, he built an empire from nothing, and he expected me to maintain it, expand it, perfect it. Growing up, love was conditional. Approval had to be earned, and the only thing that mattered was achievement. She moved back to the window. When my mother died, that got worse. She'd been the softness in our family, the one who reminded us that there was more to life than success. Without her, you became him, Ethan finished. Yes. And I told myself it was necessary, that compassion was a luxury I couldn't afford, that being tough was the same as being strong. Alexandra's reflection in the glass looked haunted. But today, when I stood in that conference room and watched that elevator on the monitor, knowing there were people trapped inside, possibly dying because of decisions I'd made, her voice broke. I would have given anything to undo it. All my success, all my achievements, all my father's approval, none of it mattered compared to those 3 lives. Ethan understood. He'd felt the same thing the night Sarah died, holding Sophie's hand in the hospital waiting room while doctors tried to save her mother. All his training, all his strength, all his determination, worthless in the face of fate and bad luck and an intersection where someone had run a red light. I'm sorry about your mother, he said quietly. Losing a parent young, it changes you. It does. Alexandra turned from the window. Sophie's mother, your wife, how did she die? If you don't mind me asking. Car accident 3 years ago. Wrong place, wrong time. Ethan's voice was steady, but the words still hurt. Drunk driver ran a red light, hit her car broadside. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. God, Ethan, I'm so sorry. Me too. He looked down at his hands, scarred from years of firefighting, still bearing the marks from today's rescue. The worst part was explaining it to Sophie. She was 4, barely old enough to understand death, and I had to tell her that Mommy wasn't coming home, that she'd never come home again. Alexandra's eyes were bright with unshed tears. How did you do it? How did you keep going? I didn't have a choice. Sophie needed me. Still needs me. Ethan met her gaze. That's why I left the FDNY. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because she'd already lost one parent. I couldn't risk her losing both. But today you risked it anyway. Today was different. There were people in immediate danger, and I had the skills to help them. I couldn't walk away from that. He paused. Though I did think about Sophie, about what would happen to her if something went wrong. That's probably why I was so careful. Alexandra nodded slowly. She's lucky to have you. Any child would be. The comment hung in the air, and Ethan wondered about Alexandra's life outside this office. Did she have children? A family? Anyone who mattered more than the next business deal? As if reading his thoughts, Alexandra said, I've never had children. Never really had time for relationships, to be honest. My father always said that personal connections were distractions, that they made you weak, vulnerable. She laughed bitterly. Looking at you and Sophie today, seeing how she looks at you, how much she clearly loves you, I realized he was wrong about that too. That kind of love doesn't make you weak. It makes you stronger. It does, Ethan agreed, though it's terrifying sometimes. I imagine. Alexandra moved away from the window, and in the fading light she looked older, more tired. I should let you go. I'm sure Sophie's wondering where you are. Probably. Ethan moved toward the door, then paused. Alexandra? For what it's worth, I think you're being too hard on yourself. Yes, you made mistakes, but you're taking responsibility for them. That takes courage, or desperation. But she smiled slightly. Thank you, though. I appreciate the kindness, especially after this morning. We all have bad days. The question is what we do after them. He left her there, silhouetted against the darkening sky, and made his way back down to the maintenance level. His mind was spinning with everything that had happened, everything that had changed in the space of a single day. Sophie and Ranger were waiting for him in the break room, Sophie coloring while Mrs. Chen knitted nearby. Sophie looked up when he entered, her face brightening. Daddy, you were gone forever. Was Ms. Hale nice to you? She was very nice, Ethan said, gathering their things. She apologized for this morning and said some very kind things about you and Ranger. Really? Sophie looked skeptical, because this morning she seemed like she didn't even like dogs. People can surprise you, Bug. Sometimes they're better than they first appear. They took a cab home. Ethan's knee couldn't handle the subway stairs. And Sophie chattered the whole way about her day with Mrs. Chen, about the excitement of the fire trucks, about how everyone was calling Daddy a hero. Ethan half listened, exhausted but content, with Ranger's warm weight pressed against his leg. Their apartment was small and cluttered, nothing like the pristine spaces of Hale Industries. Sarah's presence was still everywhere, in the photos on the walls, the books on the shelves, the throw pillows she'd picked out. Ethan had kept everything exactly as she'd left it, unable to erase the evidence of her existence. Bath time, Bug, he said, and Sophie groaned but complied, trudging toward the bathroom while Ranger collapsed on his bed in the corner. While Sophie bathed, Ethan stood in the kitchen and stared at nothing, letting the day's events catch up with him. His hands started shaking again, delayed adrenaline making itself known. He'd climbed into a burning building, risked his life, left Sophie orphaned if anything had gone wrong, but 3 people were alive because he'd done it. The bathroom door opened and Sophie emerged in her pajamas, her wet hair leaving damp spots on her shoulders. Daddy, I'm hungry. Mac and cheese okay? Mac and cheese is always okay. They ate dinner together at their small table, Sophie talking around bites about her day, about how Mr. Martinez had let her help organize tools, about how Ranger was the bravest dog in the whole world. Ethan listened and responded, but part of his mind was elsewhere, thinking about Alexandra's offer, about the promotion and the raise and the new responsibilities. Director of Building Safety. It was a position that would use his skills, that would let him help people without the immediate danger of firefighting. More money would mean a better apartment, better schools for Sophie, maybe even the ability to start saving for her college fund. But it also meant working more closely with Alexandra, being part of her world of glass towers and corporate politics. Was he ready for that? Daddy, you're making your worried face again, Sophie observed. Sorry, Bug, just thinking. About today? About everything. Ethan reached over and straightened her hair. How would you feel if Daddy got a new job? Still at the same building, but different responsibilities. More important, maybe. Sophie considered this with the seriousness she applied to all major questions. Would you still come home every night? Yes, absolutely. And Ranger could still come to work with you? I think so. Then I think it sounds good. Sophie smiled. Mommy always said you were meant to help people. Maybe this is how you can do that now. Out of the mouths of babes, Ethan thought. Sarah had always been wise, and apparently she'd passed that wisdom to their daughter. After dinner, they settled on the couch for their nightly ritual, one chapter from whatever book they were reading together. Currently, it was a story about a girl who discovered a magical library, and Sophie was deeply invested in whether the main character would find her way home. But tonight, before they started reading, Sophie snuggled closer and said, "Daddy, I'm proud of you for saving those people. I bet Mommy would be proud too." Ethan's throat tightened. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. And I think Miss Hale is probably glad you didn't listen when she was mean to Ranger, because if you had, those people might have died. You're right. Sometimes doing the right thing means not listening to people who are wrong, even if they're in charge." Sophie nodded sagely. That's what heroes do. They read their chapter, and Ethan tucked Sophie into bed, and Ranger settled on the floor beside her like a furry guardian. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his daughter sleep, thinking about all the times he'd stood in this exact spot and wondered how he was supposed to do this alone. But he wasn't alone. He had Sophie and Ranger, and now maybe a chance to build something better than what he'd lost. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Alexandra Hale. Marcus gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I wanted you to know that the 3 people you saved are being released from the hospital tomorrow. They've all asked to meet you and Ranger to say thank you in person. No pressure, but I thought you should know. Also, there's a town car at your disposal tomorrow if your knee is still bothering you. And thank you again for everything. A.H." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Town car appreciated. And I'll think about the meeting. Thank you for today, for the apology and the offer. It meant more than you probably realize." The response came almost immediately. "It was the least I could do. Sleep well, Ethan. You've earned it." He set his phone down and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Alexandra Hale was probably still in her office, still working, still trying to fix everything she'd broken. And tomorrow, the world would continue turning, bringing new challenges and new opportunities. But tonight, 3 people were alive who might not have been. Tonight, a little girl slept safely with her father in the next room and her dog on the floor. Tonight, despite everything, the good guys had won. Ethan's knee throbbed, his shoulder ached, and his lungs still burned slightly from the smoke. But as he settled into his own bed with Ranger padding in to lie on the floor beside him, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Maybe Alexandra was right. Maybe people could change. Maybe the woman who'd mocked him in the rain could become someone better. Someone who understood that real strength came from compassion, not control. And maybe, just maybe, a broken-down firefighter working as a maintenance man could find a new way to be a hero. The city hummed outside his window, indifferent to the small dramas of individual lives. But somewhere in those millions of stories, in those countless intersections of fate and choice, something had shifted. A crack had appeared in a glacier, and through it, warmth was beginning to seep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be investigations and meetings, difficult conversations and harder decisions. Alexandra would have to face her father, her board, the investors she'd failed to impress. Ethan would have to decide whether to take a job that scared him, to step back into a world of responsibility and risk. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, they were both simply people who'd survived a terrible day and found, in its aftermath, something unexpected. Forgiveness. Understanding. The possibility of redemption. Ethan closed his eyes, and for the first time since Sarah's death, fell asleep without dreaming of fires. The morning came too early, sunlight streaming through Ethan's bedroom window with the aggressive cheerfulness of a day that didn't know what the previous one had contained. His body protested every movement. His knee had stiffened overnight into something resembling a rusty hinge. His shoulder sent sharp complaints up his neck with each shift, and his lungs felt scraped raw. But Sophie was already awake, singing something off-key in the kitchen, and Ranger needed his morning walk, so Ethan forced himself upright and faced the day. The town car Alexandra had promised was waiting outside their building at 8 o'clock. The driver, a quiet professional who helped Ethan navigate the stairs without comment on his obvious limp. Sophie pressed her nose to the window during the drive, marveling at the leather seats and the bottles of water in the center console like they'd stepped into a different universe. "Daddy, is this because you're a hero now?" she asked, her reflection wide-eyed in the glass. "This is because Ms. Hale is trying to be kind," Ethan corrected, though he wasn't entirely sure himself what had prompted the gesture. Guilt, maybe. Or genuine gratitude. With Alexandra, it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. When they arrived at Hale Industries, something was different. Ethan noticed it immediately, the way the security guard at the front desk stood straighter when he saw them, the respectful nod, the "Good morning, Mr. Ward," instead of the usual cursory wave-through. In the elevator, two junior executives who'd never acknowledged his existence before smiled, and one of them said, "Thank you for what you did yesterday." Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "See? You are a hero." But Ethan felt uncomfortable with the attention, with the way people were looking at him like he'd done something extraordinary instead of simply what needed doing. He'd spent 8 years in the FDNY where heroism was just Tuesday, where you saved lives and then went home and didn't talk about it because talking made it real, made it something you could lose. Carl Jenkins was waiting for them in the maintenance office, his expression unreadable. "Ethan, hell of a morning already. You seen this?" He held up his phone showing a news article with the headline, "Maintenance Worker Turned Hero Saves 3 in Hale Industries Elevator Fire." Ethan's stomach sank. How did the press get this? Someone leaked it. Probably someone from the fire department. Maybe one of the executives you saved. Either way, it's everywhere. You're trending on social media. There's a reporter camped outside asking for interviews. Jenkins set his phone down. "And Ms. Hale wants to see you. Again. Says it's urgent. Can Mrs. Chen watch Sophie?" "Already arranged it. And Ethan?" Jenkins clapped him on the shoulder. "Try not to look so miserable about being famous. Some people would kill for this kind of attention." Some people hadn't spent 3 years trying to be invisible, Ethan thought, but he kept it to himself. He got Sophie settled with Mrs. Chen and Ranger, then made his way up to the 42nd floor. This time Marcus was at his desk, looking harried and overwhelmed, 3 phone lines blinking on hold. "Mr. Ward, thank God. She's been asking for you every 10 minutes. Marcus gestured toward the office. "Fair warning. Her father called. Twice. She's not in the best mood." Ethan knocked and entered without waiting for a response. Alexandra was pacing behind her desk, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing sharply as she spoke. "I don't care what the board thinks, David. We're not issuing a statement that minimizes what happened. 3 people nearly died because we rushed an unsafe system into demonstration. We own that. We apologize for it, and we explain exactly what we're doing to make sure it never happens again." She paused, listening, her jaw tightening. "Then tell them I said they can either support transparency or find a new CEO. I'm done playing corporate games with people's lives." She hung up without saying goodbye, then seemed to notice Ethan for the first time. "You saw the news?" "Jenkins showed me. It's a circus. I've had 17 interview requests, 5 different news stations want to do feature stories, and someone started a GoFundMe to reward the everyday hero that's already raised $40,000. Alexandra moved to her desk, braced her hands on it. "I'm sorry. I should have controlled this better, should have issued our own statement before someone else did. Now you're going to be hounded by reporters who want to turn you into a symbol." "It's fine," Ethan said, though it wasn't, not really. "I'm more concerned about the investigation." "Have they determined what caused the fire?" "Preliminary findings suggest it was exactly what you warned about. Electrical feedback from the sensor integration creating a short circuit in the elevator's control panel. The fire marshal is calling it a cascading failure resulting from inadequate testing and rushed implementation." Alexandra's voice was flat, clinical. "In other words, my fault. It was a systems failure, not a personal one. Don't." She looked up, and her eyes were tired but fierce. "Don't try to make this easier for me. I made the decisions. I pushed for the demonstration. I ignored your warnings and dismissed your concerns because I was more interested in impressing investors than ensuring safety. That's leadership failure, Ethan. That's exactly what my father always warned me about, letting emotion and ego override judgment." "Your father called," Ethan observed. Alexandra's laugh was bitter. "Oh, he did more than call. He showed up at 6 this morning, walked past security like he still owned this building, and spent 45 minutes explaining in excruciating detail every way I've failed to live up to the Hale name." She moved to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "According to him, I should fire everyone involved, blame the contractors, settle with the victims quietly, and move forward like nothing happened. Business as usual." "And you're not going to do that. No, I'm not. She turned, and Ethan could see the resolve in her face, hard-won and fragile. I'm going to do what I told David. We're going to own this. We're going to be completely transparent about what went wrong and what we're doing to fix it. And we're going to acknowledge that the only reason this didn't become a tragedy is because of you. Alexandra. Which brings me to why I asked you here. She moved back to her desk, picked up a folder, different from yesterday's, this one thicker. The board met this morning, emergency session. They wanted to discuss liability, damage control, all the usual crisis management protocols. But I told them we're also going to discuss positive steps forward, and I convinced them to approve something. She opened the folder, revealing official-looking documents. This is authorization for a new initiative called the Hero Dog Program. We're going to train and place certified service dogs throughout our properties, not just for safety detection, but for emotional support, stress reduction, veteran services. Ranger will be the program's first official participant and demonstration model. Ethan stared at her. You're serious? Completely. We'll partner with rescue organizations, provide funding for training, and create placements in our buildings and with companies we work with. It's not enough. Nothing can be enough after yesterday, but it's a start. A way to turn something terrible into something that might help people. She paused. If you're willing to participate, to let Ranger be the face of this program. Ethan didn't know what to say. Yesterday morning, she'd called Ranger filthy and demanded he be removed from the building. Now she wanted to build an entire program around him? What changed? Everything changed. Alexandra's voice was soft now, almost vulnerable. When I watched you go into that elevator shaft, when I saw Ranger with you, I realized something. I've spent my entire life trying to eliminate variables, control outcomes, remove anything that couldn't be quantified and managed. But yesterday, the things that saved those people weren't on any spreadsheet. They were loyalty, training, courage, qualities that can't be manufactured or controlled, qualities your dog has because you loved him enough to teach him. She moved closer, and Ethan could see the sincerity in her face. I was wrong about everything, Ethan. About you, about Ranger, about what matters in this world. And I want to do better. I want to build something that reflects those better values. Will you help me? Before Ethan could answer, Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking apologetic. Ms. Hale, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your father is here. Again. He says if you don't see him immediately, he's calling an emergency board meeting to discuss your fitness for leadership. Alexandra's expression hardened. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. After Marcus left, she turned back to Ethan. I have to deal with this, but think about what I said. The position, the program, all of it. We'll talk more later. She paused at the door. And Ethan, thank you. For yesterday, for today, for being patient with me while I figure out how to be a better person. She left before he could respond, her footsteps quick and determined in the hallway. Ethan stood alone in her office, holding a folder that promised to change everything, trying to process how radically his world had shifted in 24 hours. He made his way back down to the maintenance level, his mind churning. The Hero Dog program was exactly the kind of thing Sarah would have loved. Practical help wrapped in compassion, using animals to make people's lives better. And the Director of Building Safety position would give him the resources and authority to actually prevent disasters instead of just responding to them. But it would also put him in Alexandra's orbit permanently, make him part of her world of corporate politics and public relations. Could he do that? Could he trust that yesterday's transformation was real and lasting, not just a temporary response to crisis? Sophie was waiting in the maintenance office, coloring another picture while Ranger dozed at her feet. She looked up when Ethan entered, her face brightening. Daddy, Mrs. Chen said the people you saved want to meet you. Are we going to go see them? I think so, Bug. Would you like that? Yes. I want to meet the people Ranger helped save, and I want to ask them what it was like being stuck in the elevator. She paused, considering. But not in a mean way. In a I'm glad you're okay way. That's very thoughtful. Ethan settled into his desk chair with a groan his knee appreciated. What would you think if we made some big changes? If Daddy took a new job here and Ranger became famous for helping people? Sophie's crayon stopped moving. Would the changes be good? I think so. We'd have more money, a better apartment maybe, and Ranger would get to work with other dogs. Help train them to be heroes too. Like a superhero team? Sophie's eyes lit up. That would be so cool. Ranger could be the leader, and all the other dogs would learn from him, and they'd save people all over the city. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Ethan felt some of his hesitation melting away. Maybe this was the right move. Maybe this was how he could honor Sarah's memory, by helping people in a new way, by teaching others what he'd learned, by building something good from the wreckage of what he'd lost. Okay, Bug, let's go meet some grateful people. The hospital was 10 blocks away, close enough that the town car driver looked almost disappointed by the short trip. Alexandra had arranged for them to meet in a private conference room, away from the press and the regular chaos of a metropolitan hospital. The 3 people Ethan had saved were there waiting, along with Alexandra herself and a woman Ethan didn't recognize, tall, professional, with a camera around her neck. Mr. Ward, thank you for coming. The woman who stepped forward first was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair and eyes that still looked haunted. I'm Jennifer Wu's assistant, Sarah Kim. You pulled me out first. I'm glad you're okay, Ethan said, shaking her hand gently. She was trembling slightly, he noticed, probably still processing the trauma. Okay is relative? Sarah managed a weak smile. I haven't slept without nightmares yet, but I'm alive, and the doctors say I'll make a full recovery. That's because of you. The 2 men came forward next, Brian Fletcher and David Martinez, executives from different companies who'd been meeting at Hale Industries when the emergency struck. Both looked like they'd aged years in a single day, their faces drawn and exhausted despite being physically unharmed. We wanted to thank you in person, Brian said, his voice rough. What you did, climbing into that shaft, getting us out, I don't think you understand what it meant. We'd given up, thought we were going to die in that metal box. Then you appeared like some kind of miracle. I was just doing what I was trained to do, Ethan started, but David cut him off. No, you went beyond training. You risked your life for strangers. That's not training, that's character. He reached down and held out his hand to Ranger, who sniffed it cautiously before accepting a gentle pat. And this is the famous hero dog? This is Ranger, Ethan confirmed. He's the one who detected the smoke first before the sensors even registered it. Without him, we might not have known there was a problem until it was too late. Sophie, who'd been hanging back shyly, suddenly stepped forward. Ranger's really smart. My daddy trained him when he was a firefighter, before my mommy died and we had to leave that job. The words came out matter-of-fact, the way children stated difficult truths without understanding their weight. An uncomfortable silence fell. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the one that always came when Sophie's grief surfaced in public. But Sarah Kim knelt down, meeting Sophie at eye level. I lost my mom too, she said softly. When I was a little older than you. It's really hard, isn't it? Sophie nodded, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. Sometimes I forget she's gone. I'll think of something I want to tell her, and then I remember. That happened to me too, for a long time. Sarah reached out and gently straightened one of Sophie's pigtails. But you know what? Having a dad like yours, one who's brave and kind and saves people, that helps. It won't make it stop hurting, but it helps. Sophie looked at Ethan, then back at Sarah. Are you going to be okay? From being in the fire? I think so. It's going to take time, but yeah. Thanks to your dad and Ranger, I get to have that time. Sarah stood, wiping her own eyes. Thank you for sharing them with us, for letting your dad be a hero. The photographer, Alexandra introduced her as Maria from the company's communications department, took a few pictures with everyone's permission. Nothing staged, just candid shots of Ethan and the survivors talking, Sophie showing Ranger's tricks, the quiet gratitude that filled the room. Alexandra hung back during most of it, observing rather than participating. But Ethan caught her watching with an expression he was learning to recognize, the look of someone seeing the world differently than she had before. Someone whose certainties had been shaken and was struggling to rebuild them into something better. As they were preparing to leave, Alexandra pulled Ethan aside. There's something else. The video from yesterday. Someone leaked footage of the rescue. It's already been viewed millions of times. She held out her phone, showing a grainy security camera recording of Ethan climbing into the elevator shaft, Ranger at his side. There's also this. She swiped to another video and Ethan's stomach dropped. It was from earlier, from yesterday morning. The moment in the plaza when Alexandra had berated him about Ranger, her voice sharp and contemptuous, Ethan standing silent while she tore into him. It's everywhere, Alexandra said quietly. People are calling me every name imaginable, saying I'm a monster, that I deserved what happened, that I should resign. And they're not wrong. Alexandra, no, let me finish. She took a breath, steadying herself. My lawyers want me to issue a statement minimizing this, explaining it out of context, managing the narrative. My father wants me to sue whoever leaked it and go after them for damages, but I'm not going to do either of those things. She looked at the phone, at her own face frozen in that moment of cruelty. I'm going to own it. I'm going to write a public statement acknowledging exactly what kind of person I was, how wrong I was, and how you and Ranger saved lives despite the way I treated you. I'm going to let people see my failure so they can see my attempt at redemption. That's career suicide, Ethan said. Your board will never support it. Then they can fire me. Alexandra's voice was steady, resolved. I'm tired of pretending to be perfect. I'm tired of hiding mistakes and managing perceptions. Yesterday taught me that the truth is more important than my reputation. And the truth is that I was cruel and wrong, and you were brave and right, and people deserve to know that. She looked at him directly. But I won't do it without your permission. This will put you even more in the spotlight, make the scrutiny worse. If you'd rather I keep it quiet, find another way to manage this, I'll understand. Ethan thought about it. Thought about Sophie learning someday that her father had been publicly humiliated and had let it slide. Thought about all the other people working maintenance, security, service jobs, invisible until they were needed, dismissed until they proved indispensable. Thought about Sarah, who'd always believed that speaking truth was worth the cost. Do it, he said. Tell the truth, all of it. Alexandra's relief was visible. Thank you. I'll send you the statement before I post it. If there's anything you want me to change, I trust you, Ethan interrupted, surprising himself with the realization that he meant it. They left the hospital together, the town car carrying them back to Hale Industries in comfortable silence. Sophie had fallen asleep against Ethan's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional morning, while Ranger dozed on the floor. Through the window, the city passed by, millions of lives intersecting, millions of stories playing out in the spaces between buildings. Back at Hale Industries, Ethan got Sophie settled in the break room for a nap while he caught up on inspection reports. But he couldn't focus, his mind kept drifting back to Alexandra's offer, to the Hero Dog program, to the choice in front of him. At 3 o'clock, his phone buzzed with a notification. Alexandra had posted her statement. I need to tell you a story about the day I failed as a leader and as a human being, it began. The post was long, over 1,000 words, detailing everything from the morning confrontation to the elevator emergency to the rescue. She didn't spare herself, didn't make excuses, didn't try to soften the edges of her cruelty. I called his dog filthy, she wrote. I dismissed his professional concerns. I treated him as less than human because his job was beneath my notice. And then, when my arrogance nearly killed 3 people, Ethan Ward risked his life to save them. He climbed into danger without hesitation, used skills from a career he'd sacrificed for his daughter's safety, and succeeded where my expensive technology had failed. The statement continued, explaining the Hero Dog program, announcing Ethan's new position as Director of Building Safety, committing to radical transparency about the investigation. It ended simply, I was wrong. Ethan Ward is a hero, Ranger is a hero, and I have spent the last 24 hours learning that real strength isn't about control or perfection. It's about having the courage to admit when you're wrong and the determination to do better. I can only hope to earn back the trust I've destroyed. Within an hour, the post had tens of thousands of shares. The comments were mixed, some praising her honesty, others saying it was too little too late, many just fascinated by the dramatic reversal. But the overwhelming sentiment was surprise. Corporate CEOs didn't do this. They didn't admit fault so publicly, didn't elevate the people they'd wronged, didn't risk their reputations for the sake of truth. Carl Jenkins appeared in Ethan's doorway, holding his phone. You see this? Just read it. She's either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. Jenkins shook his head in wonder. Her father's going to lose his mind. As if summoned by the words, raised voices erupted from somewhere above them, carrying down through the building's ventilation system, too distant to make out words, but close enough to recognize anger. Jenkins and Ethan exchanged glances. That'll be Charles Hale, Jenkins said. Haven't heard him yell like that since Alexandra turned down his suggestion to cut maintenance staff to increase profit margins 3 years ago. He paused. She stood up for us then, too. Told him that keeping the building safe was more important than his quarterly dividends. Ethan hadn't known that. Hadn't known that Alexandra had ever fought for the people she'd seemed to despise. It added another layer to the complex picture he was building of her. Someone who'd been shaped by a demanding father into something hard and cold, but who'd maintained some core of decency underneath it all. The yelling continued for 20 minutes, then stopped abruptly. 10 minutes after that, Alexandra appeared in the maintenance office. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and she looked like she'd been crying. But her spine was straight, her chin up. My father has called an emergency board meeting, she announced to the room. He's demanding my resignation, citing gross mismanagement and public embarrassment of the Hale name. The meeting is in 2 hours. She looked directly at Ethan. I'm not going to resign, I'm going to fight. But I wanted you to know that whatever happens, the Hero Dog program is funded through my personal accounts. Even if they fire me, it goes forward. Your position goes forward. I won't let my father destroy the one good thing to come out of this disaster. Alexandra, Ethan started, but she held up a hand. I need to prepare. I just wanted you to know. She turned to leave, then paused. And Ethan? Thank you for letting me try to make this right. Whatever happens next, that meant everything. She left, and the maintenance office erupted into concerned conversation. Jenkins immediately pulled up the company's organizational charter, trying to determine if Charles Hale actually had the authority to force his daughter out. Others debated whether the board would support Alexandra or her father, what it would mean for their jobs, whether they should start looking for new positions. Ethan sat quietly through it all, thinking about Alexandra standing in her office yesterday, broken and honest. Thinking about her kneeling beside Ranger today, her expression soft with wonder. Thinking about the woman who'd been cruel and the woman who was trying so hard to be better. Sophie woke from her nap and wandered over, rubbing her eyes. What's wrong? Why is everyone upset? Ms. Hale is in trouble, Ethan said. Her father is angry about what happened yesterday. But she apologized. She's trying to fix things. Sophie's face was troubled. Isn't that what you're supposed to do when you make a mistake? It is, Bug. Then why is her daddy being mean to her? Out of the mouths of babes again. Ethan pulled Sophie into his lap, feeling the weight of the decision crystallizing in his mind. Alexandra had stood up for him publicly, risked everything to tell the truth, committed to building something good, even if it cost her everything. The least he could do was stand beside her when she faced her father's wrath. Come on, he said to Sophie. We're going upstairs. To the fancy floors? Sophie's eyes widened. Are we allowed? We're about to find out. He gathered Ranger, ignored his protesting knee, and headed for the elevator. Jenkins called after him, asking what he was doing, but Ethan just waved and kept moving. Some things you did because they were right, not because they were smart. The 42nd floor was in controlled chaos when they arrived. Marcus was on 3 phone lines simultaneously. Several board members were emerging from the elevators looking grim, and through Alexandra's open office door, Ethan could see her pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Mr. Ward, I don't think this is a good time. Marcus started, but Ethan walked past him, Sophie's hand in his, Ranger at his heel. Alexandra looked up when they entered, surprise crossing her face. She said something quick into her phone and hung up. Ethan, what are you doing here? I'm accepting your offer, he said. The position, the program, all of it. And I'm going into that board meeting with you to tell them exactly what happened yesterday, exactly what kind of leader you are, and exactly why they'd be fools to let your father force you out. You can't. That's not appropriate. Alexandra's protest died as she saw his expression. Why would you do that? This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Ethan moved closer, Sophie still holding his hand, Ranger sitting at attention. Yesterday you made mistakes, but you also owned them, apologized for them, and committed to doing better. That takes more courage than anything I did in that elevator shaft. And if your board can't see that, someone needs to tell them. My father will destroy you. He'll make sure you never work in this city again. Let him try. Ethan's voice was steady. I've lost the things I care about most in this world. A job isn't going to scare me. Alexandra stared at him for a long moment, and Ethan could see emotions warring across her face, gratitude, disbelief, something that might have been hope. I don't deserve this. Maybe not, but Sophie does. He looked down at his daughter. She needs to see that when someone tries to do the right thing, people support them. That changing for the better matters. That redemption is possible. Sophie nodded seriously. And Ranger thinks you're nice now. He has good judgment about people. Despite everything, Alexandra laughed. A real laugh, startled and genuine. She crouched down to Sophie's level. Thank you, Sophie. That means a lot, coming from Ranger's family. You're welcome. Sophie considered, then added, My mommy used to say that everyone deserves a second chance, even people who are mean at first. The words hung in the air, simple and profound. Alexandra's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, straightened her shoulders, and looked at Ethan with something like resolve. Okay, she said. Okay, let's go face the board. The conference room where the board met was intimidating by design. Long table, expensive chairs, walls lined with portraits of previous Hale Industries leaders. Charles Hale sat at the head of the table, silver-haired and imposing, his expression carved from granite. The board members were arranged along the sides, 10 people who held Alexandra's fate in their hands. Alexandra walked in with her head high, Ethan beside her, and the room went silent. Charles Hale's eyes narrowed when he saw them. Alexandra, what is the meaning of this? This meeting is for board members only. Mr. Ward is the director of building safety, Alexandra said calmly. Given that this meeting concerns the safety incident from yesterday, his presence is entirely appropriate. Unless you're planning to discuss matters unrelated to that incident? It was a chess move, publicly framing the meeting as about safety rather than personal grievances. Charles Hale's jaw tightened, but he gestured curtly to empty chairs. Very well, sit. The meeting that followed was brutal. Charles Hale laid out his case methodically. Alexandra's poor judgment, the financial liability, the public embarrassment, the damage to the company's reputation. He presented it all with cold precision, making his daughter sound like a catastrophic failure who'd endangered everything the Hale name represented. And now, he concluded, she's made it worse by airing our dirty laundry publicly, elevating a maintenance worker to a position he's not qualified for, and committing company resources to a pet project, literally, that serves no business purpose. This is not leadership. This is emotional instability masquerading as principle. He sat down, satisfied, and the board members shifted uncomfortably. Several looked at Alexandra with expressions ranging from sympathy to calculation, weighing their loyalty against their self-interest. Alexandra stood, and Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly before she clasped them behind her back. Her father's trick, he realized. Everything my father said is factually accurate, she began, and several board members looked surprised. I did exercise poor judgment. I did prioritize a demonstration over safety. I did create a situation that endangered lives and exposed us to liability. These are facts, and I won't dispute them. She paused, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. But here's what else is true. When that crisis hit, when 3 people were trapped and dying, every system I'd put in place failed. The technology failed, the protocols failed, I failed. And the only thing that saved those lives was a man I'd treated with contempt and a dog I'd called filthy. She gestured to Ethan. Mr. Ward tried to warn me. He submitted a report outlining the exact risks that led to yesterday's emergency. I deleted it without reading it because I assumed a maintenance worker couldn't possibly understand complex systems better than our engineers. That assumption nearly killed 3 people. Charles Hale started to interrupt, but Alexandra continued, her voice growing stronger. I've spent my entire career following the leadership model my father taught me. Control everything, trust no one, show no weakness. And yesterday that model failed catastrophically. So yes, I'm changing. I'm building something different. A company culture that values truth over image, that acknowledges mistakes instead of hiding them, that recognizes that the people we've treated as invisible are often the ones who keep us safe. She moved to stand beside Ethan. Mr. Ward isn't just a maintenance worker. He's a decorated former firefighter with 8 years of experience in emergency response. He has specialized training in rescue operations, building systems, and hazard prevention. He's more qualified to oversee building safety than anyone currently in this company. And the Hero Dog program isn't a pet project. It's an innovative approach to workplace safety and mental health support that could position us as industry leaders. This is ridiculous, Charles Hale started, but one of the board members held up a hand. Let her finish, Charles. Alexandra took a breath. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've damaged our reputation, but I also know that the alternative, covering it up, scapegoating others, pretending nothing happened, would be worse. Not just morally, but practically. The world is changing. People demand authenticity and accountability from their leaders. Companies that provide those things thrive. Companies that don't, die. She placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. So here's what I'm offering. Give me 6 months. Let me implement these changes, rebuild our safety systems, launch the Hero Dog program. If at the end of that time our reputation hasn't recovered, if our stock price hasn't stabilized, if the board doesn't see measurable improvement, I'll resign. No fight, no drama. But give me the chance to prove that honesty and compassion can be good business. The silence that followed was absolute. Then one of the board members, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had been with the company for 15 years, spoke up. I'd like to hear from Mr. Ward. You've been silent through all this. What's your assessment of Ms. Hale's leadership? Every eye in the room turned to Ethan. He hadn't prepared for this, hadn't expected to be called on. But he stood, ignoring his knee's protest, and spoke from the heart. 24 hours ago, I would have told you that Alexandra Hale was one of the worst people I'd ever met, he said bluntly. She was cruel, dismissive, and arrogant. She treated me and my dog like we were garbage, cluttering up her perfect world. Charles Hale smiled slightly, clearly thinking this would support his case. But Ethan continued. And then I watched her face when she realized people were trapped. I saw her terror, her guilt, her absolute commitment to saving them no matter what it cost her personally. I heard her on the phone with the fire department, with her staff, taking responsibility and making hard calls. He paused. And afterward, she did something I've rarely seen from people in power. She apologized. Really apologized, not the corporate non-apology kind. She looked me in the eye and acknowledged exactly what she'd done wrong and why it was wrong. He looked at Alexandra, who was listening with an expression of fierce attention. People make mistakes. Leaders make bigger mistakes because their decisions affect more people. But what defines a leader isn't whether they screw up, it's what they do afterward. And what Alexandra did was own it, fix it, and commit to being better. That's not weakness. That's strength. Ethan turned back to the board. I spent 8 years in the FDNY. I worked under a lot of different commanders, good ones and bad ones. The good ones weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who listened when firefighters raised concerns, who admitted when they were wrong, who put people's safety over their own pride. Alexandra did all of that. In the span of 24 hours, she went from being exactly the kind of leader I'd never follow to being exactly the kind I would. That's extraordinary. He sat down, his heart pounding. He'd probably just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in New York. But he'd also told the truth, and that had to count for something. The board deliberated for 20 minutes in private session, asking Alexandra and Ethan to wait outside. They stood in the corridor together, not speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. Sophie had fallen asleep in one of the waiting room chairs, Ranger standing guard beside her. Finally, Patricia Chen emerged. We've reached a decision. They filed back into the conference room. Charles Hale's expression was thunderous, which told Ethan everything he needed to know before Patricia even spoke. The board has voted to support Ms. Hale's continued leadership, with several conditions. First, the safety investigation must be completed with full transparency and all recommendations implemented. Second, the Hero Dog program will proceed as a pilot project with clearly defined metrics for success. Third, Mr. Ward's appointment as Director of Building Safety will be formalized, with appropriate oversight and reporting structure. Patricia looked at Alexandra. You have your 6 months, Alexandra. Use them well. Alexandra's relief was visible, her shoulders sagging slightly before she pulled herself upright. Thank you. I won't let you down. Charles Hale stood abruptly. This is a mistake. You're letting emotion override good business sense. And when this all falls apart, don't expect me to help you pick up the pieces. He looked at his daughter with something like disgust. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become. The words hit Alexandra like a physical blow, and Ethan saw her flinch, but she raised her chin and met her father's eyes. My mother, she said quietly, would be proud that I finally learned what she tried to teach me, that being kind matters more than being perfect. Charles Hale turned and walked out without another word. The board members filed out after him, offering various levels of support and congratulations to Alexandra. Patricia was the last to leave, pausing to squeeze Alexandra's shoulder gently. You did good today. Both of you. Then they were alone in the conference room, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Alexandra sank into a chair, her careful composure finally cracking. I can't believe that worked. You were brilliant, Ethan said honestly. That speech about changing leadership models, that was powerful. I meant every word. Alexandra looked up at him. Thank you for being here, for speaking up. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad I was here anyway. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Alexandra said, My father was wrong, by the way, about my mother. She would have liked you. She always believed that the measure of a person was how they treated those with less power. You and Sophie would have charmed her completely. She sounds like she was a good person. The best. Alexandra smiled sadly. She used to tell me stories about her childhood, growing up in a tiny apartment with 6 siblings, working 3 jobs to put herself through college. She never forgot where she came from, never let success make her cruel. I wish I'd learned that lesson earlier. You're learning it now. That's what matters. Alexandra stood, smoothing her clothes in a gesture that seemed more about composure than appearance. Come on, let's wake up Sophie and get out of here. I think we've all earned an early day. They collected Sophie, who woke up groggy and confused, and Ranger, who stretched and yawned like he'd been the one making difficult board presentations. The ride down in the elevator was quiet, all of them exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the day. As they reached the lobby, Marcus came running after them. Ms. Hale, the press is outside. Someone tipped them off about the board meeting. They're asking for a statement. Alexandra looked at Ethan, then at Sophie, then made a decision. Tell them we'll hold a brief press conference tomorrow morning. Right now, I'm going home. It was such a normal, human thing to say, choosing rest over public relations, family time over corporate messaging, but from Alexandra, it felt revolutionary. They exited through a side door, avoiding the reporters, and Alexandra walked them to where the town car waited. Before they got in, Sophie tugged on Alexandra's sleeve. Ms. Hale? I'm glad the other people at your work decided you could stay. I think you're trying really hard to be good, and that's important. Alexandra crouched down, meeting Sophie at eye level for the second time that day. Thank you, Sophie. That means more to me than you know. And I'm sorry about what I said about Ranger yesterday. He's a very good dog, and I was wrong to call him anything else. It's okay. Daddy says everyone deserves a second chance, even grown-ups. Sophie considered, quote, especially grown-ups, because they have more to learn. Alexandra laughed, a sound that was becoming less rare and more genuine. Your daughter is wise beyond her years, Ethan. She gets it from her mother. They parted ways then, Alexandra heading back into the building, and Ethan, Sophie, and Ranger climbing into the town car. As they drove home through the evening traffic, Sophie chattering about her day and Ranger's head heavy on Ethan's lap, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not just hope, he'd felt that yesterday. This was something more. Purpose. Direction. The sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do. His phone buzzed, a text from Alexandra. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you anyway. See you tomorrow, Director Ward. Ethan smiled and typed back, See you tomorrow, boss. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The press conference, the investigation, the actual work of building something better from the ashes of what had almost been a tragedy. But tonight, 3 people were alive and recovering. Tonight, a little girl was safe with her father and her dog. Tonight, a woman who'd been taught that compassion was weakness had learned that it was actually strength. And tomorrow, they'd all start building something new together. Something better. Something worth the risks they'd taken and the pain they'd endured. The city lights blurred past the car window, millions of lives intersecting in millions of ways, most of them invisible to each other. But sometimes, just sometimes, those intersections changed everything. One muddy paw print on a $5,000 suit. That's all it had taken to start a revolution. 6 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. The press conference the morning after the board meeting had been a media sensation. Alexandra standing before a crowd of reporters with Ethan beside her, speaking candidly about failure and redemption, while Ranger sat between them like a furry ambassador of second chances. The video had gone viral, shared millions of times, spawning think pieces about corporate accountability and the changing face of leadership. But viral moments fade, and real change requires work. The kind of exhausting, unglamorous, day-after-day work that nobody writes articles about. Ethan's new office was on the 38th floor, smaller than Alexandra's, but with a view that still took his breath away on the rare occasions he stopped working long enough to look at it. The walls were covered with safety schematics, inspection schedules, and a growing collection of Sophie's artwork featuring Ranger in increasingly elaborate superhero scenarios. His desk held 3 monitors displaying real-time data from every system in the building, a direct line to the fire department, and a framed photo of Sarah holding newborn Sophie. A reminder of why he did this work, why it mattered. The Hero Dog program had exceeded everyone's expectations. What started with Ranger had grown into a network of 23 certified service dogs placed in buildings across the city. Some were trained for hazard detection like Ranger, others for emotional support, still others for assisting employees with disabilities. The program had been featured in the Times, won a mayoral commendation, and inspired 3 other major corporations to start similar initiatives. But the real measure of success wasn't the press coverage or the awards. It was in the small moments Ethan witnessed daily, a veteran with PTSD finding comfort in a therapy dog during a stressful work presentation, a detector dog alerting to a gas leak that sensors had missed, an autistic employee able to attend meetings with the support of her service animal. These were the victories that mattered. The lives changed in ways that would never make headlines but made all the difference to the people living them. The investigation into the elevator incident had been thorough and unsparing. The final report laid out a cascade of failures, inadequate testing protocols, rushed timelines, insufficient safety reviews, poor communication between departments. Alexandra had released the full findings publicly, along with a detailed action plan addressing every recommendation. It had been painful and expensive, but it had also been honest, and that honesty had gradually rebuilt the trust that the incident had shattered. Hale Industries' stock had dropped initially, then stabilized, and was now climbing steadily as investors recognized that Alexandra's approach, radical transparency coupled with genuine commitment to improvement, was actually good business. The sensor technology, once properly tested and integrated, had been successfully deployed in 3 buildings with multiple companies expressing interest in licensing it. The disaster had become, improbably, a launching point for growth. But the changes that mattered most to Ethan weren't reflected in stock prices or press releases. They were in the culture of the building itself, in the way Alexandra now walked through the maintenance levels greeting people by name, in the suggestion box that actually got read and acted upon, in the monthly safety meetings where everyone from janitors to executives had equal voice. The invisible people had become visible, and in that visibility had found respect. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, Ethan was reviewing inspection reports when his phone rang. Alexandra's name on the screen, which was no longer unusual. They talked several times daily about building operations, program development, and increasingly about non-work matters like Sophie's upcoming school play or Ranger's latest antics. "Morning," he answered. "Please tell me this isn't about the HVAC system on floor 22. I just got that fixed." "It's not about HVAC." Alexandra's voice held an odd note, something between excitement and nervousness. "Can you come up to my office? There's someone I'd like you to meet." 20 minutes later, Ethan stepped into Alexandra's office to find her standing with an older woman he didn't recognize. The woman was in her 70s maybe, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that held fierce intelligence and warmth in equal measure. "Ethan, this is Dr. Patricia Reeves," Alexandra said, and there was definitely excitement in her voice now. "She's the director of the National Fire Safety Foundation. Dr. Reeves, this is Ethan Ward, our director of building safety." They shook hands, and Dr. Reeves studied him with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating people and systems. "Mr. Ward, I've been following your work with great interest. The Hero Dog program in particular represents an innovative approach to workplace safety that we at the Foundation believe has national implications. Thank you, though it's really been a team effort," which is exactly what Ms. Hale said you'd say, Dr. Reeves interrupted with a smile. "But we've done our research, Mr. Ward. We've talked to your former colleagues at the FDNY, reviewed your service record, and studied the program you've built here. You're being modest about something genuinely groundbreaking." She moved to the window, gesturing for them to join her. "The Foundation is launching a national initiative to improve emergency response in commercial buildings. We're looking for pilot programs to serve as models, and we'd like the Hero Dog program to be one of them. We'd provide funding for expansion, help with training standardization, and facilitate partnerships with other organizations." Ethan felt his heart rate pick up. That's incredible, but I'm not sure I have the capacity to manage something that large while also handling my responsibilities here. "Which is why we're also offering you a position as a national consultant," Dr. Reeves continued. "You'd split your time, 3 days a week here, maintaining and developing the program at Hale Industries, 2 days a week working with us to replicate it elsewhere. We'd provide additional staff, resources, whatever you need. This program is too important to remain confined to one building, Mr. Ward. It needs to scale." Ethan looked at Alexandra, trying to read her expression. They'd built something good here, something that worked. Was he ready to risk that by expanding too fast? Alexandra met his eyes and smiled. "It's your decision, Ethan, but for what it's worth, I think this is exactly what we hoped for when we started. A chance to help more people, save more lives. Isn't that why we do this?" She was right, of course, but scaling meant change, meant new challenges, meant stepping even further into a world he'd once thought was closed to him forever. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course," Dr. Reeves said warmly, "though I hope you'll decide soon. We'd like to announce the initiative next month, and having you as the public face of it would be invaluable." After Dr. Reeves left, Ethan sank into one of Alexandra's chairs, his mind racing. Alexandra sat across from him, patient as always, waiting for him to process. "This is huge," he said finally. "It is. It could change everything." "It could." Alexandra leaned forward. "But Ethan, everything's already changed. 6 months ago, you were a maintenance worker who people barely noticed. Now you're pioneering a program that's saving lives and changing how we think about workplace safety. This is just the next step." "What if I'm not ready?" "You pulled 3 people out of a burning elevator shaft. You faced down my father and a hostile board. You've built something from nothing and made it work." Alexandra's voice was firm. "You're ready. The only question is whether you're willing." Ethan thought about Sarah, about what she would have said. She'd always pushed him to be braver than he felt, to trust in his abilities even when he doubted them. She'd be telling him to take the leap, to trust that the net would appear. "Okay," he said. "Yes, I'll do it." Alexandra's face lit up with genuine joy. "That's wonderful. Ethan, this is going to be amazing. We'll need to restructure your position here, bring in an assistant to help manage day-to-day operations. And we should probably talk about compensation. This is a significant increase in responsibility." They spent the next hour working through logistics, but Ethan's mind kept drifting to the bigger picture. A national program. His work helping people across the country. Sarah would have been so proud. That evening, he broke the news to Sophie over dinner at their favorite diner. Not the cramped apartment anymore, but a larger place in a better neighborhood that his increased salary had made possible. Sophie listened with wide eyes as he explained about Dr. Reeves and the national initiative. "So you're going to be famous?" she asked, spearing a French fry. "I don't know about famous, but more people will know about the program." "And Ranger?" Ranger, too. He's kind of the star of the whole thing. Sophie considered this seriously. Mommy would like that. She always said you were meant to help lots of people, not just a few. The words hit Ethan in the chest, sweet and painful at the same time. You remember her saying that? Not exactly, but I remember how she looked at you, like you were a superhero. Sophie smiled, gap-toothed and wise beyond her years. I look at you the same way. Ethan had to blink back tears. Come here, Bug. She climbed into his lap despite being almost too big for it, and they sat together while other diners moved around them and Ranger dozed under the table. These were the moments that mattered, Ethan thought. Not the press conferences or the awards or the national recognition. Just this, his daughter safe and happy, their little family intact, moving forward together. The next month was a whirlwind of preparation. Dr. Reeves introduced Ethan to foundation staff, connected him with fire departments and safety organizations across the country, and helped him develop training protocols that could be replicated anywhere. Alexandra restructured the safety department, hiring 2 assistants to support Ethan's work and ensuring he had everything he needed to succeed. But the biggest moment came on a Wednesday afternoon when the mayor held a press conference announcing the National Fire Safety Foundation's new initiative. Ethan stood on a platform in City Hall, Ranger beside him wearing his official vest, while the mayor praised the Hero Dog program as an innovative model of workplace safety that will save lives across America. The press asked questions, cameras flashed, and Ethan answered with the calm confidence he'd developed over months of doing this work. But the moment that made headlines wasn't his prepared remarks. It was when a reporter asked, Mr. Ward, 6 months ago you were an unknown maintenance worker. How does it feel to suddenly be in the national spotlight? Ethan looked down at Ranger, who gazed back with absolute trust and loyalty. He thought about Alexandra, who'd transformed from Ice Queen to genuine friend. He thought about Sophie, watching from the audience with Mrs. Chen, beaming with pride. He thought about Sarah, whose loss had brought him so low and whose love had ultimately carried him through. 6 months ago, I wasn't unknown, he said quietly. I was invisible. There's a difference. This building, this city, is full of invisible people, maintenance workers, janitors, security guards, all the folks who keep things running while nobody notices. What happened at Hale Industries wasn't just about saving 3 people. It was about making the invisible visible, about recognizing that everyone has value, that everyone's voice matters, that the person you dismiss might be the person who saves your life. He paused, gathering his thoughts. So, how does it feel? Honestly, it feels like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. Not because I'm special, but because I got lucky. Lucky to work for someone who was brave enough to change. Lucky to have a daughter who reminds me every day what really matters. And lucky to have a dog who's honestly way smarter than I am. That got laughs, broke the tension, but afterward, when the press conference ended and people crowded around to congratulate him, it was Alexandra who pulled him aside. That was perfect, she said. Exactly the right message. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why it worked. She handed him an envelope. This came to my office. It's from the families of the people you saved. They wanted me to give it to you personally. Ethan opened the envelope to find 3 handwritten letters, each expressing gratitude in ways that made his throat tight. Sarah Kim had included a photo of herself at her sister's wedding, an event she'd feared she'd never see. Brian Fletcher wrote about coaching his son's Little League team again, about the ordinary moments he'd thought he'd lost. David Martinez's letter was the longest, detailing how the experience had changed his priorities, led him to reconnect with his estranged daughter, made him reevaluate what success really meant. They're alive, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. Not just surviving, but living, really living. Because of you. Alexandra's hand on his shoulder was warm, grounding. Never forget that, Ethan. When things get hard, when you're tired or overwhelmed or doubting yourself, remember that 3 people are living full lives because you were brave enough to climb into danger. Over the following weeks, the program continued to expand. Ethan traveled to Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, training coordinators and establishing partnerships. Everywhere he went, people shared stories about workplace accidents that could have been prevented, about the invisible workers who kept buildings running. about the need for exactly what he was building. But he always came home to New York, to Sophie and Ranger, to his office at Hale Industries and his partnership with Alexandra. They developed an easy rapport, the kind of friendship that forms when people go through fire together, literally and figuratively, and come out the other side transformed. One evening, 3 weeks after the press conference, Alexandra invited Ethan and Sophie to dinner at her apartment. It was the first time they'd seen her outside the office context, and Sophie was beside herself with excitement at visiting a real fancy grown-up apartment. Alexandra's place was in a building even more impressive than Hale Industries, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art. But what struck Ethan was how lived-in it felt. Books on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle on the dining table, family photos on the mantel. The Ice Queen had a life, a history, vulnerability. "Ms. Hale, your apartment is so pretty," Sophie exclaimed, spinning around to take it all in. "Is that your mommy?" She pointed to a photo of a younger Alexandra with a beautiful woman who had kind eyes. "It is." Alexandra lifted the frame, studying it with an expression of mixed love and sorrow. "This was taken about 6 months before she died. We'd gone to her favorite restaurant to celebrate my college acceptance letter." "She's pretty like you," Sophie observed. "I bet she was really nice." "The nicest person I've ever known." Alexandra set the photo down gently. "I wish you could have met her, Sophie. She would have adored you." They ate dinner at Alexandra's dining table. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad that Alexandra admitted she'd stressed over for hours. "I don't cook much," she confessed. "Usually it's takeout or business dinners. This is nice, different." "It's perfect," Ethan assured her, and meant it. There was something healing about this. 3 people who'd found each other through crisis, now sharing a simple meal in comfortable domesticity. After dinner, Sophie played with Ranger in the living room while Ethan helped Alexandra clean up. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Alexandra spoke. "I've been thinking about something my mother used to say. The best life is the one you build after everything falls apart. I never understood that until recently." Ethan rinsed a plate, considering. "What do you think she meant?" "I think she meant that comfort makes you complacent, that sometimes you need everything to break so you can rebuild it better, stronger, more aligned with who you really are." Alexandra dried her hands, leaning against the counter. 6 months ago, my life looked perfect from the outside. Successful company, impressive title, father's approval, or as close to it as I'd ever gotten. But I was miserable, lonely, trapped in this armor I'd built that kept everyone out. She gestured toward the living room where Sophie's laughter echoed. "Now everything's harder. The company's under more scrutiny. I'm estranged from my father, and I work twice as hard for half the certainty. But I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. How is that possible?" "Because hard work that matters is better than easy work that doesn't," Ethan said, "and because you're not doing it alone anymore." Alexandra met his eyes, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, the deep connection of people who'd saved each other in ways that went beyond the physical. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything, for giving me a second chance, for helping me become someone my mother would be proud of." "You did that yourself. I just showed up." "You did more than show up." Alexandra smiled, and it was the genuine smile Ethan had learned to recognize over the past months, not the CEO mask, but real warmth. "You showed me what real strength looks like, what real leadership means. I'm a better person because of you." "I'm a better person because of you too," Ethan admitted. "You gave me a chance to be useful again, to matter. In a way I thought I'd lost forever. This program, this work, it's healing something in me that's been broken since Sarah died." They stood together in the kitchen, the sounds of Sophie and Ranger playing in the background, and Ethan felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. Not the desperate happiness of someone trying to convince themselves things were okay, but the deep satisfaction of someone whose life finally aligned with their values. The months continued to pass, spring turning to summer, turning to fall. The Hero Dog program expanded to 12 cities, with plans for national coverage within 2 years. Ethan's consulting work took him across the country, but he always maintained his connection to Hale Industries, to the building where it all started. Sophie adjusted to her father's increased travel with the resilience of a child who'd already learned that life meant change. She started a blog documenting Ranger's adventures, which became surprisingly popular with school kids across the country learning about service dogs. She gave presentations at her school about her dad's work, about the importance of safety, about how everyone deserves respect regardless of their job title. Alexandra continued to transform Hale Industries, implementing policies that prioritized employee well-being alongside profits. The company became known as an innovative leader in corporate responsibility, attracting top talent who wanted to work somewhere that aligned with their values. The board remained supportive, the stock price steady, and Charles Hale remained conspicuously absent. He'd stopped attending meetings after his daughter's approach proved successful, unwilling to admit he'd been wrong, but unable to deny the results. 1 year after the elevator incident, the fire marshal held a ceremony honoring first responders and civilians who'd shown exceptional courage in emergency situations. Ethan was awarded a commendation for his rescue, as were the firefighters who'd supported the operation. But the moment that brought the house down was when they called Ranger to the stage and pinned a medal on his vest. Hero Dog, Hale Tower Rescue. The audience erupted in applause. Sophie jumped up and down, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Alexandra stood beside Ethan in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, not bothering to hide them. "Look what we built," she whispered. "Look what came from that terrible day." Ethan looked around the auditorium, at the first responders, at the program coordinators from cities across the country, at the families of people who'd been saved by the program's detector dogs, at Sophie's proud face and Ranger's wagging tail. He thought about how close they'd all come to tragedy, how easily this could have gone another way. But it hadn't. 3 people had lived. A program had been born. Lives had been changed, including his own. "It's pretty amazing," he agreed. The ceremony ended with a reception where Ethan found himself surrounded by well-wishers, by fire chiefs wanting to discuss program implementation, by families wanting to thank him for inspiring the work that had saved their loved ones. It was overwhelming and humbling and occasionally uncomfortable, but mostly it felt right. He was talking to a coordinator from Seattle when he noticed a disturbance near the entrance. Someone was arguing with security, trying to get in. The figure was familiar, tall, silver-haired, imperious, even in apparent distress. Charles Hale. Ethan excused himself and made his way over, arriving just as Alexandra reached the door. She and her father faced each other across the threshold, a year of silence and hurt hanging between them. "What are you doing here?" Alexandra asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I wanted to see you." Charles's voice was different than Ethan remembered, less commanding, more uncertain. "To see this ceremony. To see what you've built. You could have called, could have accepted any of my invitations over the past year." "I know." Charles looked down, and for the first time Ethan saw him as something other than a titan of industry. He saw an old man who'd driven away his daughter, who'd chosen pride over love, who was trying to find his way back. "I was wrong about everything. The board meeting, the program, the way you've changed the company. I was wrong, and I've spent a year being too stubborn to admit it." Alexandra's expression was unreadable. "Why now?" "Because I watched the ceremony from outside. Saw the medal they gave the dog, saw the way people looked at you, saw your face when they honored Mr. Ward's work." Charles's voice cracked slightly. "And I realized that you've accomplished something I never did. You built something that matters, something your mother would have been proud of, something I should have been proud of all along." The silence stretched long enough that Ethan considered walking away, giving them privacy. But Alexandra reached back and took his hand, anchoring herself, and he understood that she needed him there. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Alexandra said finally. "Not yet. You spent my entire life teaching me that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, that compassion was weakness. It's taken me years to unlearn those lessons, and I'm still not done. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong." Charles looked at Ethan for the first time, really looked at him. "Mr. Ward, my daughter tells me you're the reason all this happened, that you were brave enough to save lives and wise enough to help her see a different way." "Your daughter saved herself," Ethan said firmly. I just provided an opportunity for her to be who she already was underneath all the armor. Charles nodded slowly. She gets that from her mother. The strength, the capacity for change. He turned back to Alexandra. I'm not asking to be welcomed back. I know I haven't earned that, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. Finally, truly proud. Not because you've made the company profitable, but because you've made it meaningful. That's worth more than all the quarterly reports in the world. Alexandra's eyes filled with tears. I needed to hear that, more than you know. I know, I should have said it 30 years ago. Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, the same one that sat on Alexandra's mantel, of her and her mother at the restaurant. Your mother gave me a copy of this before she died, made me promise to remember who she was, what she valued. I kept it in my desk drawer for 15 years, couldn't bear to look at it because it reminded me of everything I'd lost. But lately, I've been looking at it every day, remembering her voice, remembering the things she tried to teach me that I was too proud to learn. He held the photo out to Alexandra, who took it with trembling hands. She'd be so proud of you, Alexandra, and she'd be right to be. You've become the best parts of both of us, my drive and her heart. That's a rare combination. Alexandra looked at the photo, at her father, at Ethan still holding her hand. Then she stepped forward and hugged Charles Hale, who stood frozen for a moment before his arms came around her, holding his daughter for what Ethan suspected was the first time in decades. I'm still angry with you, Alexandra said against her father's shoulder, but I'm willing to try, to see if we can build something better. That's all I can ask. Charles pulled back, wiping his eyes unselfconsciously. Now, introduce me properly to this program I've been hearing about, and to Mr. Ward's daughter. I understand she's quite the young advocate. They spent the rest of the reception together, Alexandra and Charles carefully rebuilding bridges, Ethan introducing Sophie to various coordinators, Ranger accepting pets and praise from admirers. It felt like completion, like pieces finally falling into place after a year of uncertainty. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, Ethan found himself on the building's front steps with Alexandra and Sophie, watching the city lights come on as dusk fell. Ranger sat at their feet, wearing his medal with dignity, completely unaware of how much he'd changed all their lives. Daddy, can we go to the park? Sophie asked. Ranger hasn't had his evening walk yet. Ethan looked at Alexandra, who smiled. Mind if I join you? I could use the air after all that. They walked through the autumn evening to a small park 3 blocks away, the kind of neighborhood green space that made cities livable. Sophie ran ahead with Ranger, burning off the energy of a long day, while Ethan and Alexandra followed at a more sedate pace. Your father seemed sincere, Ethan observed. He was. I could tell. Alexandra wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening wasn't cold. I'm not sure we'll ever have a close relationship. Too much damage, too many years of hurt, but maybe we can have something. That's more than I expected a year ago. A year ago, you expected a successful product demonstration and impressed investors. God, was I really that naive? Alexandra laughed, shaking her head. It feels like a lifetime ago, like I'm looking at a stranger when I remember who I was. You're not a stranger, you're just more honest now, more yourself. They walked in silence for a moment, watching Sophie throw a frisbee for Ranger, who caught it with the enthusiasm of a dog who'd earned his place as a hero, but was still, fundamentally, just a dog who loved playing. Ethan, can I ask you something? Alexandra's voice was hesitant. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd just been kind to you that morning? If I hadn't mocked Ranger? If I'd listened to your warnings? If everything had gone smoothly? All the time, Ethan admitted. But I think maybe we both needed things to break. You needed to see what your approach cost. I needed to remember who I was, what I was capable of. Sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. Sarah used to say that, Alexandra said, and Ethan looked at her in surprise. You mentioned it once, months ago, about building the best life after everything falls apart. It stuck with me because it's so true. Everything fell apart that day. My pride, my certainty, my entire worldview, and what I've built since is so much better than what I had before. Sophie ran back to them, breathless and grinning. Ms. Hale, watch this. Ranger, show her the new trick Daddy taught you. They watched as Ranger performed an elaborate routine involving sitting, lying down, rolling over, and ending with a playbow. Sophie applauded like he'd just won the Olympics, and Alexandra joined in with genuine enthusiasm. "That's amazing, Ranger. Sophie, you must be so proud of him." "I'm proud of both of them," Sophie said seriously. "Daddy's teaching Ranger, but Ranger's teaching other dogs, and those dogs are helping people everywhere. It's like a big circle of helping." "That's exactly what it is," Alexandra agreed. "And it all started because your dad was brave enough to help people even when they didn't deserve it." "Everyone deserves help," Sophie corrected with the absolute certainty of a child stating obvious truth. "That's what Mommy always said. Everyone deserves help and kindness no matter what." Ethan's throat tightened. Sarah would have loved this moment, her daughter speaking her words, her values being passed on, her belief in fundamental human goodness spreading like ripples in water. They stayed in the park until the sun fully set and the streetlights came on, casting everything in warm gold. Sophie eventually wore herself out and asked to be carried, so Ethan hoisted her onto his shoulders while Ranger walked sedately beside them, tired but content. At the park entrance, Alexandra paused. "Thank you for this, for letting me be part of your evening, part of your family for a little while. It means more than you probably realize." "You're always welcome," Ethan said, and meant it. "You're part of this now, part of the story." The story of how a CEO mocked a single dad's dog, and then the dog saved her, Alexandra said wryly. "It's quite a tale when you put it like that." "It's a story about redemption," Ethan corrected, "about second chances and finding courage and learning that the people you dismiss might be exactly the people you need." "I like that version better." Alexandra reached up and gently adjusted Sophie's shoe, which had come loose on Ethan's shoulder. "See you tomorrow, Director Ward." "See you tomorrow, boss." They parted ways. Alexandra heading toward her apartment building, Ethan and Sophie and Ranger toward theirs. The city hummed around them, indifferent and eternal, full of stories that would never be told and moments that would never be recorded. But this story, this moment, mattered. Not because it would make headlines or win awards or change the world in obvious ways, but because 3 people were alive who might not have been. Because a program existed that was saving lives every day. Because a little girl had 2 parents worth being proud of, one in memory, one beside her. Because a broken firefighter had found purpose again. Because an ice queen had learned to be human. Back in their apartment, Ethan tucked Sophie into bed while Ranger settled on the floor beside her. She was already half asleep, exhausted from the long day, but she mumbled one more question. "Daddy, do you think Ms. Hale is happy now?" "I think she's happier than she was," Ethan said honestly. "Happiness isn't something you achieve and then keep forever. It's something you build every day, through choices and effort and being brave enough to change. Like how you chose to save those people even though you were scared?" "Exactly like that." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and drifted off to sleep. Ethan stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her breathe, feeling the weight and wonder of being someone's whole world. This was what Sarah had wanted for him, not just survival after her death, but a life worth living, purpose and connection, and the chance to make a difference. He'd found that. Not in the way he'd expected, not through the path he'd planned, but found it nonetheless, through a muddy dog and an elevator fire, and a woman who'd learned to be better than she'd been taught to be. In the living room, Ethan opened his laptop and began writing his report for the National Fire Safety Foundation. The Hero Dog program had expanded to 15 cities now, with 37 dogs certified and working. The data showed measurable improvements in emergency response times, workplace safety compliance, and employee mental health metrics. More importantly, the program had prevented 4 confirmed emergencies in the past 6 months, situations where dogs had detected hazards before they became disasters. 4 disasters prevented. 3 lives saved in that original rescue. Dozens of lives improved through therapy and support animals. Hundreds of lives touched by a program built from the ashes of failure. Not bad for a maintenance worker and a muddy dog. Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. "Thank you for tonight, for showing me what family looks like. Sleep well, friend." He typed back. "Thank you for giving me a chance to matter again. See you tomorrow." But before he could send it, another message came through, a photo Sophie must have taken during the ceremony. It showed Ethan, Alexandra and Ranger standing together, Ranger's metal gleaming, Alexandra's hand on Ethan's shoulder, all three of them smiling. Below the photo, Alexandra had written, "The best things come from the worst moments. Thank you for proving that." Ethan saved the photo, sent his message, and closed his laptop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: a conference call with Chicago coordinators, an inspection of new safety equipment, a meeting about expanding the program to hospitals. But tonight, he just wanted to sit in his living room and appreciate how far they'd all come. 1 year ago, he'd been invisible. Now he was building something that would outlast him, that would help people for decades to come. 1 year ago, Alexandra had been trapped in armor of her own making. Now she was learning to be the person her mother had hoped she'd become. 1 year ago, Ranger had been just a dog with training and no purpose. Now he wore a medal and represented hope for people across the country. Change was possible. Redemption was real. And sometimes the worst days became the foundation for the best life. Ethan turned off the lights and headed to bed, Ranger padding behind him. Through the window, the city stretched out in all directions, full of invisible people doing essential work, full of stories waiting to be told, full of potential disasters and potential heroes. Somewhere out there, another person was being dismissed for being just a maintenance worker, just a janitor, just a security guard. But maybe, because of what had happened here, because of the story that had spread and the program that had grown, that person would be seen, would be valued, would be given the chance to be the hero they'd always had the potential to be. That was the real legacy, not the medals or the press coverage, or even the lives saved, but the shift in perspective, the recognition that everyone matters, everyone has value, everyone deserves basic dignity and respect. It had taken a crisis to teach that lesson, but the lesson had been learned, and it was spreading, rippling outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Ethan closed his eyes, Sarah's face clear in his mind, and whispered into the darkness, "We did it, love. We made something good from the pain. We helped people. I think you'd be proud." And in the silence that followed, he could almost hear her voice, "I always was, Ethan. I always was." Morning would come with its demands and challenges, but tonight, all was well. 3 people lived who might not have. A program existed that saved lives daily. A little girl slept safely with a hero dog guarding her dreams. And 2 people who'd been broken by life in different ways had found healing in the most unexpected place, in each other's courage, in each other's transformation, in the recognition that redemption is always possible if you're brave enough to change. The city hummed its eternal song outside the window, and inside a modest apartment in Manhattan, a single father and his daughter and his dog rested peacefully, knowing that tomorrow they'd continue the work of making the world a little bit better, one life at a time. That was enough. That was everything. The end.